Welcome back to another fun-filled show. We have a special guest today. We got Teach 'em Chuck. I always go to Teach 'em Chuck to get the expertise on the things that y'all be completely lost on, because y'all just be throwing stuff out, and then y'all do it so arrogantly and so boldly to where you get me upset. So I'm like, okay, let me get Chuck to go ahead and just deflate these egos and chop these heads off like the samurais used to, But y'all they ain't got enough honor to execute themselves when they're in defeat. So you got to do it for them. You know what I'm saying?
All right, they ain't never gonna do that.
Right.
They ain't never gonna do that. They gonna die. They gonna die on that hill, boy. Yeah, they gonna take it to the grave. Yeah.
So I had some videos, some people, I guess, breaking down the history of redlining in 1 minute, breaking down the history of redlining in 30 seconds. And I'm just like, y'all are telling me that redlining kept Black people from owning homes, and y'all breaking it down in 30 seconds? I'm like, my goodness. 30? Right. Not even a minute, no. 30? Come on, y'all. Come on, man.
Right. Nah. The story is a little bit, it's a little bit more complicated than that, But 30 seconds, that's not it. That's not it. But
and you are in the housing industry, right?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So not only, as you all know, if you follow Blanche, you probably follow me, or congratulations too, bro. I've been noticing your channel growing. When I watch some videos, man, I'm seeing the ads and stuff pop up. So I'm like, okay, I see you. Yeah, man. And I'll be your AI thumbnails cracking me up, man. I'll be cracking up. So yeah, I'm noticing your channel growing. But but like I was saying, if you're familiar with Blanche, you're probably familiar with me. You all know that I am a huge history buff. I mean, just all day, every day, I'm researching, I'm trying to figure stuff out, I'm breaking things down. And so yeah, this is right up my alley, aside from the fact that that's what I do for a living. I'm actually, I won't say what I do or name my employer or anything like that, because you know how people are. I mean, you can almost probably find out whatever you want to about a person in this day and age, but yet still, I hope that by the time I get large enough to where somebody would want to damage my personal life, I won't need a job anyway. So, at least a regular job. But yet still, I try to keep certain things private. But yes, I'm actually in the in the finance industry as far as the housing market, and I've been doing it for well over 10 years. So I know how this works. I know how housing goes and lending and all of the rules and regulations. And so, yeah, man, you got the right guy on here, bro.
Now, Chuck, people tell me that when it comes to housing, they look at the person. If they're Black, they say no. If they're white, they say yes. I'm just curious, is that how it works?
Well, that's the thing in terms of what, because see, a housing transaction, there's so many factors, so many people involved, so many different sides, right? You have listing agents, you have you have maybe a seller's agent or listing agent, same thing. You have the agent that brokers on behalf of the buyer. Right, you have your lender, you have your appraiser. I mean, there are a multitude of different factors involved. I know a little while ago it was a little dust up. I know I think Roland Martin had got a lot of people talking when he had claimed that on the Patrick Bet-Davis podcast that that appraiser deliberately undercut the value of homes that are owned by Black people, and that's not how it works. And if an appraiser were to do that, people don't understand. Like these things are kept; these records are kept. And so when an appraiser comes back with a report, then there are three different types of how would I want to say, the three different modes of value evaluation that appraisers can use. They can use what's called the seller's approach method, the sales approach method. They can use the cost approach method, or they can use the income approach method. Most of the time, and like common real estate transactions, most of the time appraisers will use the sales comparison approach.
Mhm.
And if an appraiser produces a report that is out of line or out of step with the peers, with their peers, meaning other appraisers who work in the market, the lender is free, or even the person who's applying for the mortgage, whether they're trying to purchase a home or whether they're refinancing a home that they already own, they are allowed to challenge the value that the appraiser put on the report. Ultimately, it's up to the lender when they evaluate the report, because the lender gets a copy and the person applying for the mortgage gets a copy. And if the lender disagrees with the appraiser's value, then certain steps have to be taken in order to they have some processes that are called, they call them reconsideration of value, or oftentimes they may have to order an entirely new appraisal at no cost to the applicant when the lender believes that they have received a bad report. And a lot of the information that the appraisers use in the different types of what are called adjustments that they make on the report to determine its value is compared, as I said moments ago, with other appraisers who also work in that particular area. And so if an appraiser gets a bad reputation, if he gets a reputation for putting out bad reports, it could be a man or a woman, right? But they are given or provided contracts in appraisal leads by what is called an appraisal management company, an AMC. And if the appraiser gives bad reports, or if a lender has to go back to an appraiser to ask them to make corrections for errors that they place on a report, they will lose leads, they will lose contracts, and eventually they'll be run out of the business, because no one will offer them leads and contracts to go appraise homes. So it's a lot. There are checks and balances involved in the process. You can't just say, well, okay, well, Black people own this home, and so therefore, and sometimes, Blanche, it would behoove the homeowner for the value of the home to come in high, and sometimes it would work in the best interest of the homeowner for the value to come in lower. It depends on the seller and what they're, what they're motivated to do, or what they're trying to accomplish. Sometimes you'll have what's called a motivated seller, where they don't necessarily care about getting the most bang for their buck. They just want to sell the home and get it over with, right? And so oftentimes, Bash, what you'll have, let's just say, for example, and I don't even know if you wanted me to start really going off into it.
But let me ask you a question, though, Chuck.
But just jump in whenever you like.
So basically, if anybody's bought a home, say there's values of your homes in your neighborhood. So let's say the average price of the homes in the neighborhood, let's say it's 300,000. Right. Somebody can't just come in and say, okay, your house worth 150,000. No, that's insanity. Like, they're gonna be like, what's, because you're gonna mess everybody else's property value up. So people are not just saying, because this family is in the house is full of Black people, we're gonna knock it down $150,000. That's not how it works. If anybody's bought a house, there are a lot of people involved. It's not just this willy-nilly Black people. Let's just know that's not how it works at all. So Roland Martin is insane, knowing good and well, nobody misappraised his house.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's not how that works, bro. So it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of factors involved, man. It's not just simply Black people getting the short end of the stick in terms of the economics of homes and mortgage lending and such and so forth. That's not true at all. I don't even know exactly where you want to start with this, but it's deeper than just redlining or discrimination, because oftentimes you'll hear people say, because they want to make the wealth argument, and they talk about the disparity in overall wealth between, let's just say, Blacks and whites. Although, and you compare whites to other races of non-whites who happen not to be black, well, then, of course, those statistical juxtapositions simply get ignored because we want to look at the black-white factor. Okay, fair enough. And we'll talk about that, because during this period of redlining, you're going to see which particular ethnic groups, the proportion of each particular ethnic group increased in terms of the percentage of folks within those ethnic groups that own homes during the time of redlining, all the way up until, many folks make the argument that redlining ceased in the late 1960s with the passage of the Fair Housing Act. But you are still seeing people bringing suit against different entities and different facts. Well, not people bringing suit. Actual I forgot which department of the federal government is responsible for this.
I think I had that video where they sued for like 9 million for
yeah. But and the thing is, Blanche, the only thing that the federal government has to do is prove what is called disparate impact. And, we'll probably talk about disparate impact, because disparate impact as a legal philosophy or legal precedent was established 2 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which, of course, was with the Fair Housing Act was a part of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. In a 1971 Supreme Court decision, Griggs v. Duke Power, they established the legal precedent of something called disparate impact. And we'll probably talk about that too. But yeah, it's ill, man.
All right, let me go to
Blanche, can I tell you this? Can I tell you this story real quick, briefly, bro? It ain't long. So listen, so I'm working last night. I'm on the computer, working from home, and I saw you was live. So I clicked on the video, and I said, cool, he talking about Trayvon Martin, that whole thing. And I watched it for a few minutes, and I was like, dang, I said, let me pause this real quick. Let me get back to this, finish all what I'm doing. Maybe I'll come back and watch Blanche tomorrow, or maybe on Monday when I start work, I'll play it back or whatever, because I was trying to focus on what I was doing. So, bro, I stopped the video. I went ahead and finished out my day. I got off work about 10:30, 10:45. And every now and again, I'll restart my computer or shut it down. You got to do that sometimes. But for the most part, I just hit the Control-Alt-Delete and I lock it down, right? I just lock it. You hit Control-Alt-Delete, you get the option to lock down, restart, shut down, or you want to go to your task manager or whatever. So I shut my computer down, right? Screens went off, it's locked. So I go on about my business. Bro, I put this on everything I love, man, on my dead father, on right hand to God. So my computer is in my bedroom, my desk. So me and the wife, we sleeping. We go to bed that night, bro. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and you at that point where you're like in between sleep and full consciousness, and you kind of like, what's going on? And then you finally wake up and come to, and bro, I swear, I'm like, and I hear your voice. Hey, here's Blanchard. I'm like, Blanche, what? I'm panicking, like, Blanche talking to me in my sleep. I'm like, what is going on? I hear you talking. I don't know why. My computer has never done this, bro. And I heard you talking, and I hopped up out the bed, and I got pretty decent speakers on my computer, and you just start blaring, dog. And I'm like, I'm like, dog, Blanche Kruger is real. Like this. I literally had to hop out the bed, man. You can ask my wife. I had to run over to my computer and shut the volume off. I had to unlock my computer, shut the volume off. And I'm like, what? The video just started playing, bro. I left it paused. I locked my computer, went and chilled out for the rest of the night, fell asleep. And next thing you know, 3 o'clock in the morning, for some odd reason, bro, it just started playing. And I just heard you talking, and it woke me up out of my sleep. I'm like, Blanche in my house? Am I dreaming about this? Like, pause, right? Am I dreaming about Blanche? Like, why am I hearing his voice? And I get up, I hop up. And I'm like, man, why is my computer playing this live right now? I'm like, Blanche for real got special powers, bro. Like, he'd have tapped into, I don't know, into the melanin or something, bro.
Is real, y'all. Don't play with me.
For real. Blanche came to me in a dream. I ain't lying. True story, dog. True. I wish I was telling this. I wish I was lying, bro. True story. I had to hop up out my bed and cut it off.
Listen, y'all, don't play with me. You hear what y'all said? Listen, And Chuck ain't even an enemy. All y'all talking, running y'all mouth. Don't play with it.
He gonna come to you and you sleep. I'm telling you, man. He got me. I ain't lying. Look. I said, why am I hearing Blanche talking? I'm tripping. Sure enough, man, it just start playing. My computer just start playing. The spookiest thing. My computer has never done that before. It did it last night.
That's weird though. Like it would cut on. That's weird.
It just cut on. But anyway, I had to share that with you in the audience, man.
Yeah, and Chuck, you know, I watched the documentary. I didn't know the Trayvon thing was that bad, man. I was like, what in the, like it was, I'm talking about, I was like, my goodness, it was bad. I'm like, my goodness.
I remember when we did one of the Cutting Through the Culture episodes, and somebody, I got into a back and forth with somebody in the comments section about it. And I was like, I believe Zimmerman. You know, I believe Zimmerman over Trayvon. And Chad called me out, not because he was trying to. He know it was kind of like a slip of the tongue, because it's like, well, Trayvon is not, you know, he's not alive to give his side of the story. But what I meant was the people speaking on behalf of Trayvon, not Trayvon himself per se, but the people exploiting this tragedy. And I remember you going, he was like, no, black people lie even when they dead. I don't know if you remember that.
I said that. Yeah.
You're like, no, Chuck, right? Black people lie even when they dead.
Goodness. I must have been on one.
I will say, Blanche, sometimes I'll be watching you, bro, and I'll be like, dang, Blanche. And you know, if anybody knows, I know, you know, and the way you be going in on Black culture, sometimes I'll be like, dang, Blanche, man, ease up on them a little bit, man, just dang. And then I'll watch one of your shows, like you did the show a couple of, maybe it was like last week, maybe, on DC, on the violence in DC, and Trump calling in the National Guard. You know, you showed the live stream of that guy. I don't know his real name. He had with the guy who got shot and killed for his chain after getting into it with somebody over a parking spot or whatever. I watched that live, and I was like, nah. I was like, I see why Blanche is on this crusade. He needs to keep banging. He needs to keep going with it, because sometimes I put myself in a bubble and where I just kind of go into my shell, and I sort of try to block out a lot of the outside world. And sometimes, man, even I forget how bad the blickities are. And I'm just like, man, nah, Blanche, I'm glad you keep doing what you're doing, bro. Keep saying what you're saying. It need to be said, because it's horrible, but it is a demonic spirit hovering over Black America, bro. It really is.
I know a girl I follow, she was like, Trump bringing in the National Guard is like martial law. And I was like, well, if the police were doing their job, he would have to bring the National Guards. Like they're only coming in because the police aren't doing their job. I said, so if y'all don't want the National Guard in your city, get on the mayors for telling these police to stand down all the time. Get y'all want to just have it just to reek, because y'all want this so-called freedom. Freedom ain't meant for y'all to spin the block. No. Like that ain't like y'all taking this freedom thing too far to where y'all want to be. No. If y'all cut up, the National Guard is coming in. So guess what? Stop making it a war zone. Stop making the music. Stop glorifying it. Start snitching. Like there's a lot of things that y'all can do to prevent Trump from having to step in. And there's a whole other cities coming next too. So y'all get ready. It's some more cities coming.
Yeah. And like you said, it's not just the criminal element, because the people who will say, well, I don't do those sorts of things, that's not me. These people in these cities, man, I mean, they're the ones who support the politicians who push the progressive agenda that, right, then, you know, turn around and undermine the ability of law enforcement. And then folks running around asking themselves, well, why does my city look like this? Why is the neighborhood so bad? Well, look at the representative that you keep supporting, you know, all the ones who, you know, cater to your racial pride and your racial ego. And then you wonder why, you know, Tyrone, as you say, keep spinning the block. But I'm not one of those Tyrones. Well, who do you support? Who do you vote for? Who determines the policy prescriptions and the regulatory guidelines that your local police department sheriff, etc., have to abide by. You're the one you're empowering these people and giving cover to the very same criminals that you want to try and distance yourself from. But the moment, of course, someone outside of the quote unquote Black community, criticizes it, then that's when you close rank around the criminal element, and then want to turn around and turn it into a race issue.
Right.
It's rank hypocrisy. You don't get to do that.
And don't you think that the irony of this, Chuck, is that we're talking about property value, and y'all are literally harboring criminals, making y'all property value go down? Like, you're talking about redlining, but your community with the crime in it is going to cause a property value to go down, and y'all mad because the white people came back and recolonized your neighborhoods. But again, the property value was lowered based on the culture in the community. I mean, again, it's crazy.
Yeah. Anyway,
I don't know why somebody's asking if you're Jamaican. They probably wanted the Tariq Nasheeds. I think it might be one of the Tariq Nasheeds in here.
All right, maybe they just ask it. No, I wasn't born in Jamaica, but my mother was. She immigrated to the United States in 68. Yeah.
We said we can talk about Jamaica.
Oh, we can talk. Oh, okay. Am I supposed to get upset? Am I supposed to get offended if you talk about Jamaica? I don't have any serious ties to Jamaica. I mean, my heritage on my matrilineal side, it stems from there. But I've only been to Jamaica like two or three times in my entire life. Am I supposed to be upset? Am I supposed to defend Jamaica? I'm an American. I'm proud of it. I don't understand what you mean. Say whatever you want to say about Jamaica.
So let me go with a this one right here should be fun. We can start with this one.
Okay.
Talk about the history of redlining and housing discrimination in America. When tracing the origins of housing,
and when you want me to stop, just you put your hand up, I'll stop.
Housing discrimination in America, we can point a finger at FDR and the New Deal. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president of the United States during a time when the Great Depression was completely ravaging America. With this happening, FDR wanted to institute a program that would give immediate housing aid and assistance to Americans. But the Federal Housing Administration and these programs would make it so that mortgage loans in predominantly Black areas would be more risky to give out. These policies ensured that mortgage loans would more often than not go to white home buyers, and they also sought to ensure that predominantly white areas would stay white. You'd see mortgage lenders and developers doing things to make sure that Black people could not buy houses in predominantly white and affluent neighborhoods. Present day America, you'll see highways built through predominantly Black and historically Black neighborhoods. Highways that were built 50 to 60 years ago to bring down the value of Black neighborhoods. The term redlining originates from when mortgage lenders and developers would draw red lines around and through Black neighborhoods to deem them more hazardous and to let people know where the predominant Black neighborhoods were.
Chuck, I gotta stop it, man.
Okay, I'm about to say I think that might be a good time.
Hold on, Chuck. All the videos say that these people were literally with a red marker, like redlining went down to them doing this on a map. I said, come on, y'all. I mean, come on. We gotta do better. Okay, come on.
Right. Well, yeah. He got some things correct as far as, so to go to FDR. Let's go to FDR and the progressive movement to provide adequate housing for all Americans. Particularly, this was primarily seen as like an urban issue, right? This was at the turn of the 20th century. After President Rutherford Hayes ordered the removal of the federal government from the South, marked the ending of the era of Reconstruction. That was really like the first era of serious progressivism in America was Reconstruction. And then you have the FDR era in the 30s, and then you can say you had the LBJ years, 1960s, his Great Society programs. I couldn't think of the name of it. But in the late 1900s, you had this wave of immigrants coming to the United States, particularly from places such as Ireland, right? You had the great famine, the Great Potato Famine in Ireland, I think sometime during the 1860s. And from there, you had waves of new immigrants coming to the United States. Many from, like I said, different parts of the British Empire, like say Ireland, Scotland. You had a lot of German immigrants, folks from Eastern and Southern Europe, and those folk, to be fair, to be clear, those folk were placed beneath, because see, the whole issue of race before, there was, I guess, this embrace of this melting pot philosophy, which kind of put all whites together and all blacks together, such and so forth. Of course, this was coincided with the early eugenics movement, where it wasn't just black versus white. Certain segments of Europeans. Am I coming through clear, bro? Like I'm breaking up.
It's kind of yeah.
Let me see. Okay, I'm gonna wait till it stops. Okay, look like it's straight now. So as I was saying, I don't know where I left off before I started breaking up right there.
You were saying the waves of immigrants were
Yeah,
coming. These immigrants were not black. They were like what you would consider white now, but they weren't seen as they were seen as lower class.
Yeah, they were seen as a lower class of white people. And in the early eugenicists, they talked about this. They talked about how there was inherent differences between what they referred to as Nordic Europeans versus Alpine Europeans. And according to the eugenicists of that time, Southern Europeans were considered inferior to Northern or Western Europeans. Anyway, point is that when all of these newly arrived folks came, fleeing Europe for various reasons, you would imagine that the United States didn't have the necessary, I guess you can call it, the housing infrastructure necessary to provide these waves and waves of new immigrants with adequate housing. Particularly, they showed up at the Hudson, and a lot of these folks were packed into New York City, right? And one of those immigrants who came to the United States was a man by the name of Jacob Riis. He came to the United States from Denmark. And he came to the United States from Denmark. And to make a long story short, to talk about Jacob Riis briefly, he did a lot of odd jobs, right? The legend has it that he arrived in America from Denmark with $40 in his pocket, $40 in a dream. He ended up making a way for himself after performing, odd jobs, whatever. He finally lands a solid position working for the police department as a reporter for the New York City Police Department. This is where this was the beginning of a relationship that he would later cultivate with the would-be president Theodore Roosevelt, who at the time was the commissioner of the New York City Police Department. And of course, Theodore Roosevelt, the cousin of FDR, Theodore Roosevelt is the one who popularized the very idea and the very conception of progressivism during his time. And you can read about Teddy Roosevelt and his progressivism. He was a Republican, but due to internal disagreements within the party, because like I said, during Reconstruction, that was like the first era of progressivism. And, many of folk, I guess, within the party began coming to the realization that the Republican Party needed to embrace a more conservative approach. Because the case can be made that during the 1860s, 1870s, that the Republican Party was the party of progressivism. Well, by the early 20th centuries, that all began to change. And Theodore Roosevelt didn't want to see the Republican Party make such a change. He still believed in this. He still believed in the philosophy of progressivism. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt left the party in 1910 and formed the Progressive Party, or what became known as the Bull Moose Party, which was named after Teddy Roosevelt because that was his nickname, the Bull Moose. Okay, and you can read about Teddy Roosevelt and his conception of progressivism in his new nationalism speech, where he talked about reforming the nation and changing the nature and the character of the federal government. I just got to put that out there because it all relates to Jacob Riis, because Jacob Riis was one of the country's early progressive proponents, and his main cause célèbre at the time was the quote unquote housing crisis in the late 1800s. Now, Blanche, you can imagine why there would be such a housing crisis, right? Where are we gonna, not so much where are we gonna house all these people, but see, the thing, and this guy in this TikTok reel is neglecting to mention, is funny to me, is that it's like they like home, like homes, how they call it, it costs, right? It costs money. Homes are not free, right? And they're not readily available. And so Jacob Riis was under the impression, and this became the progressive attitude for decades, going all the way into when the Federal Housing Authority was founded in 1937, and when you began to see the construction of our country's first housing projects in the late 30s, early 40s, because they were doing so under the belief that they needed to, what they called, clear slums. They had to clear the slums and create these project buildings, because it was the environment, right, that was the breeding ground for all of this crime. Because remember, Jacob Riis was a reporter for the New York Police Department, and he got to see a lot of New York City's seedy underbelly, and a lot of these crimes were being committed by newly arrived immigrants who, in his mind, didn't have an adequate place to stay. I mean, they would house people. I mean, it was bad. And you can actually go online and you can see some of Jacob Riis's most famous photographs. And he ended up compiling all of these photographs that he took, and he gave a narrative to each photograph, and he released it, and he compiled it, comprised it, made it into a book. It ends up getting published in 1890. This book was called How the Other Half Lives. How the Other Half Lives. This is 1890. And Jacob Riis began saying that, well, you know, we need to do something about these slums, right? It's not the people that are necessarily, you know, committing these crimes. It's that they're psychologically, yeah, it's the environment that's causing this. So I just kind of briefly give the
hold on a second, Chuck. So I don't know if you all know in the chat, but they used to have places called like boarding houses where it'd be like one bathroom on the floor with like multiple families on the floor, and they all had to share one. So like the housing, it makes sense. It was an issue, and it wasn't just a Black issue. It was people coming here in the droves. We even see the pictures, Chuck, with people on the ships just like packed like sardines on the ship coming over here. So you can imagine people start showing up. Think about in recent years, you all, just last year with the immigrants coming over here.
Right.
They were like, if, for example, they were in New York, they were gutting out buildings, renovating buildings just to accommodate the immigrants coming in, you know, to these so-called sanctuary cities. So we can imagine that the housing was a huge issue, and it wasn't necessarily a race issue, more than it was just a fiscal issue of how are we going to house these people, where are we going to put them? We can't have them on the streets, you know. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, Chuck, to what you were saying, because I just wanted to paint that picture of, you know, it's a difficult task trying to put people in a house, especially when they're just coming here with no job and no anything.
Exactly. There's no job. They have no means to purchase a home. Homes have to be built, right? Material and labor. I mean, there are a lot of things that have to take place, right? You can't just go to the government and say, okay. And so that's the thing, you know, with this whole housing is a right kind of a thing, because of course, when you make such a claim, well, then by default, right, your right becomes someone else's obligation. So fast forwarding to go back to the TikTok. So fast forward to the 1930s. So this was going on for several decades, but it wasn't until FDR where things were taken up a notch, and FDR really took it upon himself to just really go about radically transforming America. And in 1933, the same year that he was inaugurated after winning the election in 1932, FDR formed what was called the PWA, which stood for his Public Works Administration. Within the Public Works Administration was a subdivision dedicated to housing. It was called the Federal Housing Division, which was part of FDR's Public Works Administration, right? You have to think now, when his guy is talking, he's talking about homes and people not. So here's what the whole redlining thing, here's what the redlining thing was all about. Because the federal government, of course, the federal government does not build homes, and nor does the federal government, of course, the federal government does not generate its own revenue, right? The federal government can take upon itself the task of trying to make home ownership easier by involving itself in the private sector, all right? So you have to ask yourself, well, how did the federal government do this? Because if you're talking about going to a bank, for instance, and asking them to lend you money so that you can purchase a home, well, the lending market or the capital market, well, that's a private matter. And so you have to ask yourself this question: how do you get a group, separate groups, disparate groups, or disparate financial institutions all competing with one another for business, right? For credit-worthy applicants so that they can turn a profit? How do you get them to collude in order to exclude an entire race of people? It just didn't happen that way. Redlining was not a private matter. It was a government matter, in that loans that the federal government insured, right, were quote unquote redline. And here's what I mean. You have three different types of government subsidized loan programs. You have what's called your FHA loan program, you have a VA loan program, and you have what's called a USDA loan program. Of course, FHA, that's the Federal Housing Administration; VA, the Veterans Administration; and the USDA, that's the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Each one of those loan programs are for sort of set aside for a certain type of buyer looking to purchase a home. So what the federal government did, here's the thing, because they know that they are relying upon taxpayer subsidies to provide lenders with what's called mortgage insurance. Follow me now. I'm explaining what redlining is. A lot of people don't know, and I apologize if it may seem simple, because a lot of people know about this. If you own a home, if you have, sometimes even if you're familiar with the process, a lot of stuff just goes over people's heads. They may forget, because you're just bombarded with so much stuff when you go to a financial institution. If you're looking to purchase a home, there's so much stuff, and you just want to get the whole thing over with. Buy the home, show up at closing, sign your title documents, get the keys, and go sit your behind down somewhere. So a lot of people who've gone through this probably don't even, to them, it may seem like like news, new information, what I'm saying, right? And so when you have a government an insured program, what that did was, Blanche, is that the belief was that this would give lenders extra incentive, because the federal government vowed to cover any potential losses on the back end by forcing the applicant to pay a little bit, to pay a little bit extra in the form of mortgage insurance.
Okay.
So so the federal government is saying to themselves, okay, we're reaching into the purse of the taxpayer, and we're using their monies to provide insurance for private lenders who otherwise would not extend credit to less credit-worthy applicants, right? And so the federal government, knowing that, okay, even though we have the taxpayer purse at our disposal, our resources are still limited because we have to be mindful I guess they were trying to be mindful of how they were spending this money. This is where the whole redlining phenomenon came in because for cultural reasons, yes, people cluster together along cultural lines, they cluster together around ethnic lines, value lines, such and
Religion.
so forth, religious lines. The federal government began sectioning off certain areas that were densely populated with people that they considered to have low credit grades. And it wasn't that the lenders could not extend credit if you were a Black person living in this area. You just couldn't have your loan backed and secured by the federal government because they refused to insure the loan. That's all that's all that was.
But
Because
hold
go
on.
ahead.
So they only refused to back the loan because the person would be a high risk.
Exactly. These were so this is the discrimination. The discrimination wasn't racial. The discrimination was these people aren't readily credit worthy. In an attempt to get lenders to extend credit, the federal government began offering lenders mortgage insurance in the form of, again, in the form of a VA loan
Got
or in the
you.
form of an
Okay.
FHA loan.
Got you.
As you know, when it comes to, like I say, this whole thing about redlining, again, it wasn't racial. It just so happened that a lot of Blacks would live together, a lot of Italians will live together, a lot of Irish folk will live together, a lot of Jews will live together, and such and so forth. And all of these people, Blanche, were quote unquote redlined, not just Black people, but many of the people, and that's why I gave the backstory of the Southern Europeans that immigrated here, the Eastern Europeans that immigrated here. They too were redlined. Particularly Jews were redlined, Italians were redlined. Again,
Polish.
like I said, yep, Polish people were redlined. Blacks were. As a matter of fact, in terms of sheer numbers, Blanche, a greater number of white residents were redlined than Blacks were, right? And even though you can say, well, Blacks were disproportionately redlined during this time. Again, redlining was a policy that began in 1934, 1933, 1944, 1933, 1934, somewhere around there. And the height of redlining went on for roughly about 3 decades, from the 1930s to the 1960s. When redlining initially began, Blanche, for example, Asian Americans, a significantly lesser percentage of Asian Americans own homes than did Black Americans and Hispanic Americans. Along the trajectory, Blanche, from the 1930s to the 1960s, as one could easily assume, because of the collective wealth and growth of the country as a whole, as the United States began to grow in wealth, it began to, as they say, as the old saying goes, the tide began to lift all boats. What Blacks became wealthier, whites became wealthier, Hispanics became wealthier, but Asians became wealthier at a faster track. So by the time the redlining began in the 30s, all the way up into the 1960s, home ownership, Blanche, increased for all Americans along the same trajectory. More Blacks began to own homes. More Hispanics began to own homes. More white. So that's because everyone was getting wealthier. Asians, on the other hand, they were trending along the same trajectory as well. But by the end of the 1960s, Asians began to outrank Blacks and Hispanics. They surpassed them on the way in terms of percentage of homeowners within their particular ethnic group. And Asians too, like many other newly arrived immigrants to the United States in the late 1800s, early 1900s, particularly in these urban mega centers, these folks were too redlined. So again, it had nothing to do. It's just the federal government was saying, we're not just going to hand out monies all willy-nilly. We can't do that. If you want to own a home, if you want someone to extend credit to you in order to purchase a home, right, then you have to make the necessary steps in order to
You got to
become a
qualify.
creditworthy applicant. You have to qualify.
Yeah, you have to qualify.
And what's so strange, Blanche, is that because there were some Black-owned banks around at the time, and we have studies that show that, and the Black banks were smaller. They didn't have as much capital to work with, and so because they didn't have as much capital to work with, right, their strings were a little bit shorter, so they weren't willing to extend credit to Blacks as much as let's say a white-owned institution would be, because they didn't have the equity and the capital. And so Black savings and loans companies and groups, etc., they were more likely to deny a Black applicant than a white-owned bank was, because they were smaller banks. So again, this had nothing to do with race and anything like that. This was all financial. Once upon a time, Bletch, a mortgage was the safest bet, was the safest investment until the federal government began getting involved in the process. And then, of course, we could talk about the housing crash of 2008, which relates directly to what we're saying right now. But yeah.
Legacy of these racist policies exists today. A study finds that property managers in Chicago, Los Angeles, Louisville, Houston, and Providence are least likely to answer prospective Black and Hispanic tenants. Add your name to the petition linked in my bio to stand in solidarity with the people experiencing these racist policies and to help end housing discrimination once and for all.
Hold on, you know what I find funny though? What I find funny is when I think about the people that actually are able to purchase a home and those that aren't, there's no middle ground. Either you can get a house or you can't. This notion that there are people in limbo, like, I can't get a house, I'm out here, it doesn't, either you can get the home or you cannot get the home. So again, I'm trying to figure out who are these massive millions of people waiting in limbo to get this home, because the process, because you got to qualify, that's what lets you know who actually can get a home and who can't. So a person working a minimum wage job, just because they want a home, doesn't mean they're gonna get one. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Doesn't mean you're being redlined. You make you make $10 an hour. You're not getting a home, right? You're just not getting it. That's not redlining. It's not redlining.
No, it's not. It's not redlining. And there's nothing you hear. And you probably got somebody on a TikTok reel talking about this, about how owning a home is the safest and easiest bet toward entry into the middle class. But again, these are all, it's like these liberals or whatever. And again, a lot of conservatives, this is why we're having this conversation, because sometimes, people on our side don't have a defense. They don't have a pushback. It's always like, you probably got me with that one. But that was then, and there's so many opportunities now when we need to stop playing the victim and this and that. We hit them with the normal conservative script. But no, the historical record is not what these folks say that they are. Say that it is. For example, like I said, homes are not free, right? I mean, in order for you to capitalize on any would-be home equity in the future, you first and foremost need to have wealth in order to make the purchase in the first place. So owning a home does not create wealth. Well, one has to be wealthy to some extent in the first place to even make the purchase. The question is, why have homes over the years gotten so expensive to the point where first-time home buyers cannot afford to make that initial down payment? Mm-hmm. Now, that's another question. That's another a separate issue, and as you would imagine, that has much to do with our politicians and our housing is a right type activists. It has everything to do with their meddling and less to do with the private sector. But owning a home.
Can I say this too? I know that being from California, mm-hmm. You probably see this in Detroit with people that aren't from America. All of them will live in the same house, mm-hmm. save up money mm-hmm. until they have money for a down payment to go purchase a home. They're willing to sacrifice and be inconvenienced to get the home. And for the first step, people will move out, get a house, second set, third, and so on and so forth. What I see though, a lot of people trying to do this home buying thing solo, newly married. Y'all don't have anything accumulated to even purchase it, put the down payment. So it's almost like, I believe that like back in the day, there was more as far as families together for goals to be achieved, as far as financial goals to be achieved, i.e. home, whatever, business, whatever. But I think more so today, it's like an individual saying, I want a home. You just got out of college, you just started your career. Like, how you gonna get, like, how you go, you got a car note, you pay, you know what I'm saying? You paying $2,000 in rent. Like, how are you gonna save money? You got student loans to pay back. How are you gonna save money for a down payment? So I don't know. I just see a lot. I think it's culture too that plays a part in it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. And these things, man, these things crumble simultaneously. I mean, you can criticize the rate of Black home ownership. You can talk about the marriage rate amongst Blacks, or household family incomes and median family incomes, individual incomes, the rate of illegitimate children and crime, all of the bad, all the social indicators. These things tend to trend in the wrong direction, right? Almost concurrently. There is no, well, this causes this, well, this causes that, like a domino effect. It's a switch and a change in mindset that brings forth a almost unilateral, simultaneous collapse of all things that make for a healthy and thriving society, healthy and thriving community. People were owning homes, Blanche, in spite of this quote unquote a redlining policy, because again, some folk were allowed to I guess purchase homes, and some people will apply for mortgages, were given the monies to purchase homes without government intervention, right? I mean, you have, of course, you have what are called conventional loans. And conventional loans, even to this very day, Blanche, conventional loans come with less strings. These are the people who have higher credit scores. They bring a higher the down payment to the table, right? They look at four main factors. They look at your income, property, assets, and credit. These people are better suited for a conventional loan product, and it is easier to take out a mortgage on a home when you go the conventional route, because the federal government puts less guidelines and stipulations, because not only do you as an individual, I mean, people who have lower credit scores, they may qualify for an FHA loan, but they may not qualify for a conventional loan product. But with that, you also have to assess the health of the security instrument, in this case, the home itself, the collateral itself, because the collateral on the debt matters because that's another way that the lender can cover up any potential losses on the back end in the event that they have to seize your property. But they don't want to seize your property if your property is not livable. And here's why that's important, because this brings us back to this question of Black people was held back because they wouldn't let us buy homes, and homes is how you generate wealth and this and that. No, not necessarily. A home, you can look at it as an investment, because when you purchase a home, not only it's not just this magic ticket that makes you rich, right? Because a home it has to be paid for. It's more debt, and it's another expense, right? And it's an investment, just like anything else is an investment. There's no guarantee, right, that you will make good on that investment. You may end up taking a loss. For example, and I deal with it all the time, I see it all the time, right? So here's what home equity is. Let me explain this. Again, like I said, I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk down to anybody if it sounds like duh, but a lot of people don't know this stuff. I'm telling you, man, they don't. So when people say that well, black folks need to, we need to amass generational wealth, and we don't have generational wealth because they wouldn't let us purchase homes. What people are talking about when they say that, they're talking about home equity. Of course, home equity means that you owe less than what the home is currently worth, and the value that is left over from what you still owe on the loan is called equity. It's just as good as cash, but your home itself, figuratively speaking, is like a bank, but not literally, because in order to get the liquid, right, that is within the equity, this is almost like an abstraction, this thing we call equity, because the amount of equity, Blanche, of course, is determined by the value of the home, which is determined by other factors, like, for example, you apply for a mortgage, the lender has to contract out an appraiser to come assess the property, etc., etc., etc. So here's the mistake that a lot of people make, right? They think to themselves, I have I got home equity. Or say, for example, this is a very good example of say a person inherits a home from someone. A home that gets passed down to them by their grandparents or whatever, or their parents, right? Say the home is owned, there's no lien. So there's no lien holder on the mortgage. They own it free and clear, right? When there's someone in a lien position, that person, in other words, a bank, credit union, etc., they're in the lien position. They require you to have homeowners insurance. Oftentimes, sometimes you can avoid it, but I think it depends on like your wealth, and I think you have to be extremely well off, extremely wealthy, and you have to have a very, very high credit score, maybe like in the high 800s or something, in order to avoid, Blanche, of course, what's called an escrow account. So an escrow account, when you make your monthly mortgage payment, you're paying principal, interest, insurance, and taxes. Taxes and insurance go in what's called an escrow account, where the mortgage lender makes sure that your insurer and the county gets their money. Because you can't just say, no, you gave me this money to purchase this home. I owe you. I will pay the county and pay my insurer on my own. That ain't none of your business. The lender says, no, 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 no. Because if something happens to that home, if it burns down and you ain't got no insurance,
Everybody
right?
out of luck.
Everybody out of luck. The lender's out of luck, because their philosophy is, if your home burns down, you have nowhere to stay. So guess what? The home, because you still owe on the debt, you still owe the loan. But if you need somewhere to stay, the lender's philosophy is you're going to divert whatever monies you own toward the person or toward the thing that is providing you with immediate shelter. Because why would you pay the loan on a home that you're not living in? Sure, it may go into foreclosure. It's going to be on your credit report for the next 7 years. But I got to do what I got to do, because I can't afford to pay this mortgage on this home that I'm not living in and give money to this landlord or whatever, right? I don't have the funds to do that, right? So the lender wants to make sure your home is insured, just in case they have to come take your home, it's still there. And they also want to make sure that you're paying the county, because your home can be seized if you aren't paying your property taxes, right? So this is what some people do, because this is where individual choice comes in. And this is what people like my man's in the real or whatever, that's what they don't consider, that individuals have agency and they make choices. And a lot of people do things that are irresponsible. Trust me, bro, I see it every day. So if you own a home, Branch, that's free and clear, insurance costs are getting worse and worse. I mean, I live here in Michigan. I know it's different per state, per area, whatever. I understand it's different. And as an aside too, there's no such thing as a national housing market. There's no such thing. Housing markets are local. But set that aside for a second. So if I get a home that's free and clear, Blanche, I might be saying to myself, dang, bro, man, I want them new J's, or I want this, I want that, man. The PlayStation 6 about to come out, or this about to do that. And you're thinking about all of these things you want to do, right? But you have this, you have this home, and you're saying to yourself, hey, man, if I'm looking to save money, I got equity. I have equity in my home, right? Somebody gives you the bright idea to take out a mortgage on a home that you already own, right? i.e. refinance, which is essentially like buying the home from yourself, okay? You don't have to use all of the equity. You could just use some of it, right? Now, over the years, you say to yourself, you know what? Since I own the home free and clear, I'm going to cancel my insurance policy. I don't want to pay it anymore. I'll just take the risk that nothing is going to happen. Trust me, Blanche, it sounds crazy. People do it every day. They don't want to pay. They would much rather take the chance because they think nothing bad is ever going to happen to me. I'd rather buy a gold chain or buy a new car or whatever. So they cancel the insurance.
Over homeowners insurance?
Homeowners insurance. I see it all the time, right? For whatever reason. Again, because remember, home owning is an expense. So what happens? They say, you know what? It's time for me to cash in on my equity. I can use that equity to one of the go-to items that a lot of people neglect. They neglect their roofs. So say, I need a new roof. Okay. I don't have insurance. I can't go out and get insurance now because the insurer is not going to replace the roof if the roof was messed up when I, right, applied and got the insurance. But and it's a very, very costly repair. Replacing a roof can be 20, 30 grand. I don't have it out of pocket, but I got all this home equity though. There you go. I'm going to go to a lender and see if they can't give me cash for my equity. So they go to a lender. The lender, Blanche, the lender's going to send out an appraiser. The appraiser going to look around. Even though the appraiser is not a third-party inspector, that's a whole nother can of worms because appraisers are not property inspectors, but they are allowed to report back to the lender if they see things that relate to safety, structure, and soundness. If you have a bad roof, Blanche, it's deemed by the lender to be that home is uninhabitable. You can't live somewhere that doesn't have a roof. So guess what happens? The appraiser goes back to the lender, tells the lender, here's what the home is worth, but they need to replace this roof. The lender then goes back to the applicant and tells them, okay, before we make it to close, if we want to close on this loan, say if your home is worth $300,000, you own it free and clear, that's $300,000 cash. But Blanche, keep in mind too, you're taking out a new loan. So now you're going to open up an entirely new line of credit that you have to begin paying. Or you can just simply say, I know I got $300,000 worth of equity in this house. I'll just use 100 grand. Fair enough. You're free to do that. And you still have $200,000 worth of equity in your home still if you want to refinance it again. Okay. So you want to take out monies and you say to yourself, I'm going to do some renovation, because that's what a lot of people use their home equity for. They use it for renovations, home improvement projects, whatever, to make their home more marketable in the event that in the future they may want to sell it, right, etc. They go to the lender and the lender tells them, you got a bad roof, man. And they say, well, I say, okay, they'll say, no problem. We'll replace the roof once we receive the funds from the refinance transaction. Can't do it. Want to know why? Because once you sign on that dotted line and once we issue you that check, once the lender issues you that check, you are under no obligation to do with the money what you promised the lender that you were going to do with it. You don't got to replace the roof, the windows, the foundation. You don't have to do anything. You have to do that first because a lender cannot extend credit on bad collateral. It's damaged. I see it all the time, Blanche. Homes that are worth 2 grand, 3 grand, 4 grand, 5 grand are useless collateral because people let their homes fall into disarray because owning a home is an expense. And the lender is not obligated to give you monies for bad collateral in the event that they have to foreclose on your home. They cannot recoup those losses if they take something that is uninhabitable because they can't sell it. I see it all the time. So you can't just go and say, well, owning a home, that's a key to the middle class because I can use home equity and make investments and do this and send my kids to college or whatever. It doesn't work that way. Owning a home is just like anything else. It's a risk, and there's no guarantee that owning a home is going to make you wealthy.
So let me get this. I'm trying to understand something real quick. So you mean to tell me a person would get the money and refinance the home and take the money and just do whatever they want to do with it?
Yep. Yep. And they will get upset because they're saying, how dare you? What do you mean? My home is worth. And listen, I see it all the time. It's like you cannot do that. You cannot do that. Oh, having home equity is not an alternative to insurance or home warranties. Even home warranties, right? It's almost like a supplement for home insurance, but not exactly. You know, people don't want to purchase home warranties. I get it, but that's why again, owning a home is a major expense, and sometimes it would be in someone's best interest to rent momentarily, or not just momentarily, even perhaps for a longer period of time, because every individual is motivated by different things, and every individual has different financial needs, different housing needs, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, bro, I see this kind of thing all the time. Like I said, owning a home is a burden. It's not some magical ticket. Say, well, the federal government was discriminating against. No. That's not how that works.
Okay, hold on. You mentioned something earlier. You mentioned about, well, I'll just show it to you because you mentioned when I was going to show. Let me see.
Myth, according to Thomas Sowell, which I'm sure you believe in, says, quote, nor did either the mainstream media or political leaders ever mention the fact that black-owned banks turn down black mortgage loan applicants at least as often as white-owned banks did. Why were blacks turning down their own people?
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking
Obviously
about it.
You don't, because this is
Charlie, I would like to be very specific here.
I was just very specific.
So I'm talking about the GI Bill, which allowed people who had served in our wars, including a lot of black Americans, to come back and get
you're talking about redlining, right? So this is redlining.
This is connected to redlining.
No, which one do you want to talk about, GI Bill or redlining?
If you allow me to explain, this is connected to redlining.
Okay.
I guess you don't understand that, but I'm happy to explain it to you right now if you just let me get.
Hold on. How is the GI? Hold on. How is the GI Bill connected to redlining? So you're saying that you would have an approved loan for serving in the military to get a home, but they wouldn't let you get a home?
Bro, two totally separate issues. Like Charlie is saying, I don't know where she's getting this from, and it's funny too. I mean, not to sidetrack, but I mean, they're talking about the GI Bill, and it's ironically they mentioned Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell went to college because Thomas Sowell served in the United States military during the Korean War. Thomas Sowell was a Marine. Both he and his brother went to college off the GI Bill. Right. You know anything about Thomas Sowell, you read his background, you read his autobiographical material. Of course, Thomas Sowell was a college dropout who, ironically, Blanche, I'll just give you a little tidbit and tell your audience who may or may not know. Of course, Thomas Sowell got his bachelor's at Harvard, got his master's at Columbia, and got his PhD at the University of Chicago. But initially, Thomas Sowell enrolled, get this, at Howard University. He went to Howard. A lot of people don't know this. If you don't read about the life of Thomas Sowell, he went to an historically black college university. He went to Howard. And in Thomas Sowell's own words, the educational standards at Howard was abysmal, even back in the 1960s. He said it was a train wreck. He said, I don't understand how an institution can function like this. I even believe, if memory serves me correctly, Thomas Sowell even went back to teach for a short time at Howard. He was a professor there, Dr. Thomas Sowell. A lot of people don't know that. But so this whole idea that the blacks were kept out, they weren't allowed to go to college off the GI Bill and what have you. No, blacks, whites, anyone who served in the United States military, if they wanted to go to college.
Oh, I'm thinking about, you're right. Okay, I'm thinking about the VA loan, and the GI Bill.
No.
Yeah.
Totally separate things. What she's talking about.
Okay, so I think she means the VA loan. Is that what she's talking about? I think.
Maybe that's what she means. I'm not sure. I guess we can keep listening.
this out. I promise you it'll be worth the effort. The GI Bill gave low interest loans to people who had served in the war, right? And those loans were issued they were federally backed loans. So the banks would issue to people at a low interest rate so that they could buy homes and generate what we now understand to be the basis of middle class wealth in this country. What ended up happening was the process of redlining was that banks said, oh, we're only going to issue loans for you to buy in certain neighborhoods.
Right, black banks.
All banks.
Right, so why did black banks do that?
The overwhelming majority of issuers in this country.
No, you got to answer the question. Why did black banks do that?
I will answer your question. But what I'm talking about is the overwhelming majority of issuers, just like today, even more so back then, the overwhelming majority of issuers were white-owned banks. And those banks redlined communities where they said, we will not issue to people who live in these communities. Now, what ended up happening, what that meant for black people, was because of what's called a restrictive covenant, which meant that in the law, in the covenant that attached to the land for a lease, many of them precluded black people from buying in those neighborhoods. So basically what happened was banks...
No. Hold on.
I got to talk about this. You got something you want to say, Blanche? Because I got to chime in.
No, I'm just saying, y'all making up stuff. That was it went from redlining to a secret covenant. Y'all got to stop, man. Come on.
Okay, let me explain.
But hold on, Chuck. So VA loan for homes, GI for education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think she's just speaking about them, like kind of conflating them. But I get what she's saying. So the GI Bill was, the federal government would pay for your educational expenses, whatever you want to go to college, job training programs, etc. And then you had the certain VA benefits involving with home loans. I personally, I don't work intimately with VA type loans. I'm more familiar with FHA style loans, so I can't. But in general, just generally speaking, it's just the same principle. But I'm not exactly sure what the some of the VA guidelines are because I don't work with them. But as she said, the VA was one of these federally backed mortgage programs, mortgage loan programs. But I wanted to talk when she said something about restrictive covenants. What she's talking about, Blanche, and that was a thing. I'm gonna tell you about it. So I know so if you're familiar with, say, for example, like a homeowners association, right? Homeowners association. If there's a home that is under the purview of a homeowners association, there are certain declarations and bylaws that those who own homes that are within that context, they agree to the certain rules and guidelines. And if you read some of the and if you read some of these master deeds, some of these homeowner association bylaws, and they may, and depending upon how long these covenants have been around, they amend them over and over again. Sometimes you'll have restrictive home covenants or homeowners association master deeds that are over 100 pages long. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And there's some benefits from it, and there's some setbacks from it.
Hold on, Chuck. So the covenant, is she talking about She's talking about HOA. So she's saying that's a covenant.
Yeah, that's what she's referring to, because members. So when there's an FHA, when there's an HOA, members of the association, the leadership, you have to vote to become a member. And there's a council of people that vote on things and set the. It's like its own little miniature body politic, if you will. And for a time in America, you did have restrictive racial covenants. In other words, people were prevented from selling their homes to let's say blacks if it was an all-white neighborhood, right? And the homeowners association, right, for the purpose of protecting or keeping high the property values, for example. I mean, it could be motivated by anything, or say they just hated black people, whatever, right? They didn't want black people to purchase the homes in those neighborhoods. Keep in mind, black folks were owning homes, purchasing homes. These things didn't happen everywhere, but there were some select instances where this thing happened. well, and I think it was Missouri, either in or around St. Louis, but I think it was Missouri. A woman challenged this ruling. It went all the way to the Supreme Court in a case known as Kramer v. Shelley. This was 1948, Bland, 1948. And the federal government made the decision. I don't remember how the justices voted, but they made the decision that racially restrictive HOA covenants were unconstitutional. This was 1948. So this is, again, this whole thing was not, it hasn't been a factor for a very long time. Again, but even with that, it doesn't even get to the heart of the issue. But to go back to the Supreme Court's write-up, the decision was that although there is nothing illegal, right, about having a racially restrictive covenant, the reason why the Supreme Court shut it down was because what happened in that particular instance, I forgot who was the black party, was the white party in that case. You can look it up. But people in the chat may be familiar with the Kramer v. Shelley case. A black family was going to move in, and they were like, this violates the declaration of the neighborhood, the covenant. And so they had to go to the state court, right, to enforce it, to prevent the sale of this home to a non-white person. And I believe the states ruled in favor of the HOA, said you can't sell to them. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overruled, I think, the state of Missouri. I think it was Missouri. They overruled the state of Missouri because they claim that even though, this is weird how the Supreme Court does these things, even though that's not illegal, right? If a person wants to enforce the covenant, they must go to the state judiciary, which acts as a kind of like a de facto legislative body, and in so doing, it violates the principle of the 14th Amendment. In other words, the state does not have the authority, because in the federal government's mind, or the federal court's mind, this, of course, violated the Equal Protection Clause, which a lot of bad law gets shoehorned into the 14th Amendment. A lot of meaning gets etched into the 14th Amendment, which is why a lot of the southern states were opposed to its passage. That's a whole nother story, because the passage of the 14th Amendment was one of the most controversial moments in American history, but that's a totally separate conversation. But you see a lot of this civil rights nonsense being put forth under with the weight and the legitimacy behind it of the 14th Amendment. And so this was the principle that the people who oversaw the HOA, since they had no recourse but to go to the state government had no authority in the matter. And to refuse to sell to blacks was a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. Not only did it violate, here's the thing, Glenn, you have to consider.
Hold on one second, Chuck. So
Mhm.
basically, but what you're saying is, what you're describing isn't a government initiative, though. These are individual HOAs saying we don't want people. So again, she's still conflating the two issues, because that's not redlining. That's not redlining. Yeah. That's like a group of people saying we want the neighborhood all whatever. It could be all Hispanic, all white, whatever. Yeah. But that's them doing it and going upon themselves to having to go to the state legislature to get it done. That's not the same as the government saying we don't want black people to live in these areas. It's not the same thing. So she is conflating two separate issues.
Yes, like I say, again, the federal government through the Supreme Court shot it down. Individuals in the private sector came together and said, we don't want blacks living in our neighborhood. But here's where it violates the Equal Protection Clause, because it violates the rights of the seller, not the person. You say, well, man, I want to live here, even though you're going to be in a neighborhood where people don't want you, theoretically speaking, which is strange. Why would you? But anyway, People make choices. They are free. They want to live in an all-white neighborhood where they're not wanted. Fair enough, right? They want to live there. If a white person is willing to sell, if they want to make profit from the sale of a home, how dare you prevent me from selling to someone who wants to purchase, even though they're black, right? You say, well, you agreed to the you agreed to it, whether when you bought the home, you knew the rule was on the books, or as a member of the association, we voted on this, it passed, so you already know you can't sell your house to a black person. So I don't even know why you trying to act brand new. They said, well, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna go to the court. I'm gonna file a suit and go to the state court. The state said, yeah, the agreement is the agreement, bro. I mean, you can't sell to a black person. But then the federal government stepped in and said the state government does not have the authority to make such a decision, because making such a decision violated the tenets of the 14th Amendment, which is the Equal Protection Clause, which, again, we don't need to get into, but you're violating the rights of those two private individuals engaging in that transaction. Even though you agreed to it, you cannot go appeal to the state government, because that's not the state government's, that's not their place. They don't have that authority.
Okay, let's see because black folks think she won this debate, so let's see.
Would only lend to people and give those low interest loans to people who were allowed to live in white neighborhoods, which meant that systemically, black people weren't able to take advantage of that same low interest loan program that enabled so many white people who ordinarily would not have been able to afford a house, because they fought and served in our wars, to do so. Now, how many black banks are in America, and how many black banks were in America in the 1960s,
if there's even one example,
Charlie?
That's the question.
No, because
but blacks were discriminating against themselves, and whites were being discriminated more than Asian Americans.
This is what's so fascinating.
Let me answer this question. Why was
did
black?
you want me to answer your question about
well,
black
you're not. You're dodging and you're dancing.
No, I'm
so
happy to.
Very bluntly.
Let the record reflect that I'm happy to answer your question about black boners. My point is that
answer the question.
Before we started this conversation, Charlie, you assured me that it would not be pugilistic in nature.
It's not. I'm asking you to answer a question, and you're not doing that.
I got
Black. I know you got part two. Let me just say something real quick. Again, like you mentioned, she's conflating two totally different issues, two separate issues. Again, on the one hand, she's talking about, as I just gave a brief history of the whole thing about blacks not being allowed to move into certain neighborhoods. Then she's talking about blacks not having access to low interest rates. That's not, again, even if you get a let's just say a government-backed loan at a lower interest rate, you're still having to pay a higher monthly premium, because you have to pay the PMI, which stands for the private mortgage insurance on all government-backed loans, because that just provides the lender with a little extra added security. She won't answer the question, because she knows that there is no answer to the question, because the issue of quote unquote housing discrimination was not racial in nature. It was purely economic. And the reason why, according to Dr. Thomas Sowell, that black-owned banks lended at the same degree, if not less, to black applicants than white-owned banks, was because black banks had a lower pool of capital to work with. Therefore, they weren't as willing as white banks, because these banks would, if people were to default on these loans, these black lenders, black savings and loans operations and such and so forth, they would go out of business.
And yes, and so they couldn't afford the risk.
They couldn't afford to take the risk. They didn't have as much capital and equity.
Well, it's funny. She said they wouldn't give them a loan. Then she said they would only give them a loan to stay in this area. Like she said, like 4 different things. Like I'm like, which one? It can't be all of it. It can't be they wouldn't give them a loan, then they would give them a loan.
The thing is, but you either have to believe that the private sector works or you don't. If you take it upon yourself to say, and it's funny because she says these things and she assumes, she begs the question, which is, what makes her think that anyone is obligated to give you anything simply because you ask? I don't understand this. Well, I'm black. I want to buy a home. You told me no. It's like, okay. Well, you don't get to tell me that. I said, well, we'll get to the doctrine of disparate impact, hopefully, at some point, because you don't have to prove racial discrimination anymore. The only thing that you have to prove is quote unquote disparate impact. But you don't get your hands on something simply because you ask for it. Let me tell you something. Of course, we all know the story of the Italians, right? Italian immigrants coming to the United States, and the formation in California of the Bank of San Francisco, right? The Bank of San Francisco I forgot the exact year it was founded, but of course, the Bank of San Francisco served an exclusively Italian clientele. And I believe, if memory serves me correctly, the founder of the Bank of San Francisco was an Italian man himself. His name currently escapes me, but his clientele was exclusively Italian during a time when Italians were, I don't want to play these games or who had it worse, blacks or Italians and this and that. Again, a lot of Italians, just as an aside, I just want to point this out, that the slum clearing agenda, right? To go back to, and I talked about Jacob Riis and some other folks, Teddy Roosevelt. A lot of because remember, at this time, Blanche, you still had the majority of blacks were still living in the South. The so-called ghettos, the hoods, the urban problems, city problems. These were, they got some blacks in Harlem, which was once upon a time called New Amsterdam, right? Harlem used to be predominantly white. Black investors came in, bought up Harlem. The white residents tried to keep black investors out of Harlem. They were unsuccessful because you had white residents and other white folks in the city of Harlem that were willing to do business with black folk back then because, right, money talks, BS walks.
Right.
That's the private sector. That's just what it is. And so the rest of the story of Harlem, as we like to say, the story of Harlem is history, right? It's all, so we get that, right? So Italians in these cities like New York, Chicago, these places there was a particular area in Chicago on the near north side where the former towers of Cabrini Green once stood. Cabrini Green, the most notorious housing project probably in American history, was a site. Its name, Cabrini, is an Italian name. The name Cabrini was given to the building. It was named after an Italian nun who became sort of like a matron saint of the Catholic faith. The tower, because you had Cabrini at first originally, and then they built the Green Tower. So you had Cabrini, and then later they built Green, and so you had together Cabrini Green. It became one massive project. Well, the idea, they built these projects on top of these old slums that were occupied predominantly by Italians. You get what I'm saying? And these areas were racked with so much crime and so much decay and urban blight that particular area of what became the Cabrini Green projects prior to its construction was called Little Hell. They called it Little Hell because that's how dangerous it was. And of course, it wouldn't, that area at the time was not as dangerous as Cabrini Green would go on to be decades after that. But in the beginning, a lot of these housing project areas, they were mixed with Italians, blacks, Jews. A lot of people lived in these project areas because they wanted to get them out of the slums. And you had to have, Blanche, it's just like anything else when it comes to the federal government and setting guidelines for itself in terms of, okay, what loans will we back, or which loans will we insure versus which loans we will not insure? Because for a time, only certain individuals were allowed to take up residency in a public housing project. Once upon a time, Blanche, believe it or not, in order to qualify for residency in a public housing project, you had to be married. There had to be a man and a woman in the home.
That makes sense.
Not only that, the federal government the first the first housing vacancies were originally allocated. Maybe I don't know if she's, but whatever, this lady is talking about this. But the housing, the project thing is a kind of total separate issue from owning your own home. It's different, but again, it's the same because it's in that whole pool of the so-called fair, adequate housing, equal housing movement. The first people who were allowed to take a residency in these public housing projects were people who were connected to the military, military veterans, et cetera, because they wanted the best of the best. They wanted good people in these buildings. They even went so far as to interview the children, ask them about their schooling, ask them about their grades. They wanted to know if your children were well behaved. Over time, as these families who had the requisite skills and the human capital to transition out of public housing, the politicians had no other class by which to exploit for the purpose of their own ambitions, right, as politicians, by claiming to be spokespersons for this downtrodden class. Because the people who took up residencies in the beginning in these public housing projects, one can make the case that they had the requisite human capital from the get-go to make it without the assistance of the federal government, right? Because the federal government handpicked the best people. But the government belief became these people who transitioned out of public housing were able to do so because we gave them public housing. So what they did was they started going further and further down the trough. We don't care if you got a husband anymore. We don't care about how your kids act anymore. We don't care about, how much, money towards the rent that you could contribute. Because it's all subsidized. You got to pay something, but you might not have to pay it all because a lot of the burdens on the taxpayers, etc. So they began to lower the standards for occupancy. And that's when our public housing projects fell into disarray, when they began to lower the behavioral and the cultural standards, because they start letting any and everybody come in. And that's when the Italians moved out and the uppity Negroes, they all got out of the projects because these people were of a different mindset. Now, to go back, this is why I brought up the Italians, just to go back. During a time when Italians were not having a good go about it in America. They were finding their way, just like everybody else. But they had a reputation. They had a reputation of being honorable, and they gained a reputation, because this is culture now. They gained a reputation of being a peoples who paid back their debts. And to not pay back your debt was a sign and a source of shame. And this was part of Italian culture. This was part of their own internal cultural dynamic. And as a result, someone noticed a niche in that market. They said, I'm going to begin extending credit exclusively to Italians because I know they have the propensity to pay back. That's their reputation. They started a bank called the Bank of San Francisco. That bank grew into what is today the largest bank in the country, and that is Bank of America. Bank of America began as the Bank of San Francisco, and it serviced an exclusively Italian clientele, and it became the Bank of America that you know today. And by the second generation, the mass wave of Italians that came in the early 20th century, by the second generation, Italian home ownership outpaced home ownership for other whites.
You said by the second wave of immigration?
By the second generation, when their parents came in the early 20th century.
Okay, you said after
by the time they had children, by the 30s and 40s, they began owning homes. They began outpacing other groups of white immigrants that came to the United States because of their culture.
Okay, Chuck, I've got a question. So they say that, this is what I hear all the time. Every time I go to a black neighborhood, they always say this neighborhood used to be white, right? But now its neighborhood's all black. And so I would wonder, I was like, well, how was black people able to take over a neighborhood if they couldn't buy a home? So, I mean, that's why redlining never. And when you just talk about the Italians, I'm like, this stuff never made sense to me because I'm like, these people were owning homes. When I was coming up, every black person that I knew, older black person, they all owned their home. Like there was no such thing as renting a house. And you either live in a house, some apartments, or some projects. But if you was in a house, you own the house. And so the whole redlining, I'm like, how it just don't make no sense to me because how do people get in a home? But it's funny that the guy that started the Bank of San Francisco, that he recognized, he said, wait a minute, these people culturally, if it brings them shame to not pay their debt, then they'll go through hell and high water more than likely to pay the debt. So even if 1 out of 10 does it, I'm still at 90% to pay the debts back. So it's like it's a good investment. I mean, I don't know. I think it's a genius idea to even do that.
So it's a blend. If you got all these black folks and they got money, they got assets they can bring to the table, they have collateral they can bring forth, they have, I mean, whatever. Listen, it's life is hard, it's tough. I know progressives, liberals think we can solve all the problems and take care of everyone's needs, but that's just not reality, okay? You either believe in government planning or you believe in the private sector. In other words, individuals acting in accordance with certain market incentives to get them to cooperate in ways that are mutually beneficial. If there's a profit to be made, the philosophy of the private sector, capitalism, right? This money grubbing, this thing that exploits people. No, the idea is that if I can make something of it, if I stand to gain by associating with someone who I can benefit from, not someone that I can exploit, but someone whose association I can benefit from, then I will do that. If there are all of these worthy, credit worthy, asset worthy black home buyers, the idea of the private sector, the philosophy is that somebody will find them. Because guess what? The people who people who are in the lending business, they too are competing. This is why you cannot exclude a certain segment of the population for long if you want to compete, right? You do so at your own peril because someone has to pay the cost for that discrimination. Somebody got to pay for it. This is why when our homie Chad O. Jackson always makes the point, I make the point, you make the point. We talk about how segregation was slowly coming off the books in the South. After, I won't get into the Civil War and the whole what was going on in the South during that time. I will just say that racial wounds were beginning to heal. Then, of course, communist agitation began reopening those wounds in the 1920s. And it all came to a head with the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s and Black Power and all that other foolishness, right? But, when those racial wounds were beginning to heal and things like Jim Crow and all that stuff was phasing out because white business owners, for example, they're the ones who had to pay the costs for someone else's political ambition because they wanted to design a country that kept the races apart. Now, again, that there are some built-in difficulties to having the races come together, as we can see, because you have racial demagogues that exploit these kinds of things. That's why you always have these issues when there are multi-ethnic societies. This isn't just the Americas. This is America. This is in the Balkans. This is in India with their caste systems and whatnot. I mean, people talk about the untouchables in India, right? The thing about the untouchables, a lot of people don't notice the untouchables is not one group of people. The untouchables are a collection of thousands of different groups of Indian folk that are considered untouchable because they are not even members of the Hindu caste. Okay, they're outside the caste. So you have this in India, you have this in various parts of Africa, Sri Lanka, Ireland, there's always internecine ethnic or tribal warfare whenever you have two separate groups of people forced to live within the same national boundaries. America is not unique in this way, but America, yeah, there's examples of slavery in all other parts of the world, but the story of black and white in the United States does not mirror the exact does not mirror get what I'm saying, the way in which ethnic warfare manifests in other countries. And so the question becomes, ethnic warfare, racial warfare, tribalism, let's just call it tribalism, to explain it and to rationalize it, it's deeper than just, well, we were slaves and white supremacy and white. The story is a lot deeper than that, because you see the exact same instances of tribalism and tribal warfare in other parts of the world where the same kind of slavery in the United States didn't happen. Okay, with the kind of slavery in the United States didn't happen in these other areas. Okay, so white people didn't want to pay for it. This is where you get the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. All right, let me just talk about this, because it may not seem like it's related, but it is, because again, the federal government, and this is why the FDR and the Public Works Administration began drawing lines around communities, again, because they were providing these private mortgage lenders with what was called mortgage insurance to entice them to lend to people that they otherwise would not have, because these private lenders would not have deemed them credit worthy. Okay, to go back to Plessy versus Ferguson. All right, Homer Plessy, I don't know. And it's funny because there are no surviving photographs of Homer Plessy. We don't even know exactly what he looked like, but we do know with confidence that he could pass for white. Okay. The story goes that he did have some black relatives or perhaps some blacks in his immediate ancestry, but he was a very, 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 very fair-skinned man. So, the story goes that he could pass for white. Well, people think that he got on this train and he was confronted and told that he had to go to the blacks only car and all this and that. And that's not what happened. The reality of the Plessy versus Ferguson case is that Homer Plessy colluded with the Louisiana-based railroad company, because it was the railroad company that wanted to take the case to the Supreme Court. They just used Homer Plessy as the patsy because Homer Plessy was an activist who was fighting for all these civil rights causes or whatever. The short story is he stepped up and said, okay, I'll be your huckleberry. They used Homer Plessy because the railroad company wanted to put an end to forced segregation, because that money, because they had to accommodate both blacks and whites, Blanche. So that means they had to construct two separate rail cars. And that's more supplies, that's more money, more fuel, etc. If you have a plane or a train that's half full, instead of putting everyone in the same rail car, you have to create a separate rail car for blacks, which came at a greater cost to the railroad company, and they just doesn't want to pay for it anymore, right? And that's the same with everything else. People do not want to pay the cost of being racist when they're forced to put their money on, when they're forced to put their own ass up there on the line. I mean, yes, you have some people who are diehard ideologues that come hell or high water, it doesn't matter. Well, fair enough. But the principle is that the ultimate minority, Blanche, is not the black person, the gay person, the ultimate minority is the individual. Because ultimately, everybody is going to look out for themselves first and foremost, because as Adam Smith believed, and again, I'm not to say this doesn't necessarily fly in the face of the Christian ethic, but just follow me for a second. Adam Smith would say that human beings are limited in their moral faculties, meaning that a tragedy that happens close to home is going to impact you more than when you hear about 50,000 people dying in a massive tsunami over in Southeast Asia somewhere, versus if one of your family members were to kick the bucket, they meant something to you, you feel it a lot more than those thousands of folks. Even though that's a much bigger tragedy, you don't care as much. And there is nothing that a person can do in order to create that that connection to that faceless person that they don't know. So they're going to look out for themselves first. So the idea of the private sector is that if there's money to be made, people will set their racial tribalism to the side and do business with someone on the other side if they themselves can benefit. Never forget racial loyalty. I ain't got time for that. It's money over here, right? Because people are motivated by these kind of things. And so that's how you get such things as greed and certain human vices. This is how you get those vices, if you want to consider them that, to work for what is in the best interest of the common good. This is why the free market system is so brilliant. This is why it works this way.
And if you think about it, in the free market, there is, and this is why I said the racism and all this stuff would have dissipated, because there's always somebody that wants to make money, and there's always somebody that wants to spend it. So,
that's right.
So eventually those two forces are going to cross. Like, it's inevitable for them to cross paths, because think about it. If I start a business and I have access to 100 white people, but let's just say there are 50 Hispanics, there are 75 black people, and there are 25 Asian, I'm going to go home one day and say, wait a minute. If I just open my doors up to these groups of people, I'm going to quadruple my money. I'm like, who wouldn't? Like, nobody's that racist. I don't care what these people say.
That's it.
Nobody is that racist. They're not. Like,
that's it.
It's crazy.
That's it, bro. You ain't gotta like me. We ain't gotta, like I say, people say whatever they want to say about what was my man's got mad at his one little girlfriend, mistress, whatever, when she brought Magic Johnson to the game with Donald Silver. What is it? I don't know.
I forgot his name.
Everybody got all offended.
Sterling,
they demanded, Donald Sterling or something like that.
Donald Sterling, yeah.
Demanded that he sell the team. But see, at the end of the day, he can think whatever he wants to think in private. But see, the fact of the matter is that when it comes to merit, when it comes to the meritocracy, right, we can get into the why, but that's a separate conversation. The reality is, or at least the perception is in the United States, that Black men are the cream of the crop as far as the talent pool when it comes to basketball. Donald Sterling is not a fool. I mean, even though the Clippers weren't world beaters, they had a time when they had Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, and what was the other dude that could, basketball better than me, Blanche? DeAndre Jordan. They had them, and Chris Paul. They had a little squad, and it was looking like, okay, LA's a redheaded stepchild may be on to something here. And all of a sudden, everybody got upset. But see, Donald Sterling can think what he wants to think about Black people in private, but he knows who the best players are. And it's funny, all these soft players wanted him to demand that he sell the team. I don't care about what Donald Sterling thinks about me. We ain't got to be friends. We ain't got to get along. But he paid your black tail, didn't he? Just make sure the check clear, bro. Cut the check. I've been given the opportunity of my lifetime to play basketball for a living. And this guy hates my guts. But guess what? At the end of the day, he wants to try and put the best talent on the field, because the perception is that, blacks are the better basketball players in terms of the American talent pool. And so racism didn't matter when it came to who he hired, at least who he hired to play basketball.
But let's be real, Chuck. First of all, just because he doesn't want a black guy messing with his chick don't mean he's racist.
Right,
like
exactly.
that don't make him like, of course he gonna say that. Like, what else he gonna say?
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? But anyway, second thing is, I think he bought that team for like $14 or $17 million, and he sold it for $3 billion.
$3 billion. Okay, there you go.
He told me, like, did he really get punished? I mean,
no, he didn't.
Come on.
No, he didn't. Listen, it's the optics of the thing. So yeah, man. So again, the redlining thing, Blanche, is a myth. As I said, at that time, all racial groups in America, home ownership increased for everyone. Home ownership for Asians rose exponentially to the point where they surpassed both blacks and Hispanics. But no, redlining did not do the things that these people claim that it did, because again, the federal government does not have the resources to. It didn't at the time. I mean, it still doesn't now. I mean, of course, it all depends upon you can talk about fiscal responsibility and these things. We all, especially here in the conservative ecosystem, we could talk about the size of the federal government and the amount of spending and all of these things. But that's why the redlining thing was instituted, to try to help curb exponential federal spending. And this was even during the 1930s on the FDR, who didn't budget. The FDR probably couldn't spell federal budget. He didn't care, But there were, I guess you can I guess you could say that there were some sane heads in the room that were like, bro, we can't just insure all of these mortgages because we're going to bankrupt the federal government.
Yeah, that's what would have happened. Exactly what would have happened.
Duh, right? Because again, people in the private sector, you can't stop them from lending who they want to lend to, and you can't force them to lend who they don't want to lend to. That wouldn't happen until the 1960s with the passage of the Fair Housing Act. And then in 1977, you had something called the Community Investment Act. And then in 1990s, and then you had the Dodd-Frank, and they all got involved. And it was a bipartisan attempt to provide, to create, I guess, more parity in the home ownership statistics and whatnot, low income families and this and that. And that's what eventually led to the financial collapse in 2008, because many people were given loans who didn't deserve them.
Then, the irony of Black people talking about redlining, but not talking about when they was giving those loans for these $500,000 houses that they couldn't afford. They never mentioned what they were getting during that time period, how they was trying to ball out and almost lost their mind. Hold on, let me go to this last video.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
The question.
Before we started this conversation, Charlie, you assured me that it would not be pugilistic in nature.
It's not. I'm asking you to answer a question, and you're not doing that.
The question is, how many Black banks are in America at the time issuing those kinds of loans? Charlie, at the end of the day,
so you're not answering. I got it. That's fine. No, it's okay.
Charlie, answer my question to you, which came first.
It's probably a low percentage, but Thomas Sowell's scholarship, which is a lot more extensive than yours,
that's a logical fallacy.
Says this.
Just because you can find one counterexample.
Do you know who Thomas Sowell is?
Of course I do. He's a Black conservative public intellectual who a lot of people respect.
Who won a Nobel laureate for his research on this.
Charlie,
it's a big deal.
If you want to have a debate with Thomas Sowell, or if Thomas Sowell wants to have a debate with me, I'd be happy to do that. But I think that we two here can sit here as people with the ability.
Man, Thomas Sowell, he would turn into a hibachi chef, and she would be literally fried. I'm talking about fried. Talking about one example. You think this man gonna use one example to make a girl stop?
To reason.
No, I agree, but I'm going to trust Sowell more than you. I'm sorry. It's like, because he actually lived through this.
Well, why did you ask me here if you weren't interested in me explaining to you
I would think
my perspective on the world?
You would at least have some response to this, which you don't, and that's fine.
Well, no,
just
Charlie,
say you don't.
Charlie, if we're going to move forward, we're going to have to get back past this basic logical fallacy that you keep encountering.
Which one is that?
Which is that if one counterexample of the thing that satisfies your argument exists in the world, you seem to think that the gestalt of human existence doesn't matter.
No, there's a lot more than one example.
There are hardly any Black banks in America today, Charlie, but you think that the existence of one Black bank in 1963, who, according to you, based on ephemera, discriminated against a Black person,
First of all, you're getting way too worked up. You are.
Undermines the entire reality of a white banking system that systemically did not issue loans.
Let me ask you another question.
Did you know, Charlie, that in 1947, there were 3,200 VA guaranteed loans in a random state, let's say Mississippi, and only 2 of them were issued to non-white borrowers? And it's not just the South.
Let me ask you a question, though.
In New York and New Jersey, there were 67,000 of these loans, and only 100 of those 60,000 went to non-white borrowers.
Okay, so this is what I don't like, Chuck. My question is, how many Black people applied for the loan? You can't just look at a number and say, how many Black people applied for the loan? If it was only 100, then it makes sense. But you acting like it was 67,000 compared to the white people. No, I said they always do that. They always take this number like, no. What is the context of the people applying for that loan?
Yeah, that's it, Blanche. It has to be discrimination, because that is their rationale for everything, because that's their meta perspective, because they think that human beings, that we are all the same, and that groups are all the same. But the reality is that human capital does not develop in a vacuum. And what I mean is that oftentimes, people are simply victims of their own circumstance, victims of circumstance. Sometimes they are victims of geographical circumstances. Just one example, because it's kind of hard to play the whole social justice game when you're just talking about environment. For example, you look at the number of Americans struck by lightning year in and year out, right? An overwhelming majority of individuals struck by lightning in the United States happen to be men. Something close to 80%, I believe, was the figures I've seen last time I checked. But an overwhelming majority of men are struck by lightning, more so than women. Okay. Now you can theorize as to why that's so. The average height, perhaps men are more likely to be outside. Again, I don't know. There are a ton of things, but one thing that you cannot say and expect people to take you seriously is that somehow nature is punishing men and by striking them with lightning. It's just, nature is like sentient in this way. So that's like an example of men being at a disadvantage when it's raining. So that way men have to remain inside because they're far more likely to get struck by lightning. Again, we don't necessarily know why it just pans out that way. And that is true when it comes to a lot of things when you're talking about groups and where those groups excel and where those groups lag. And a lot of those things, again, have nothing at all to do with this oppression narrative, but they have to play it up, of course, because I believe to go to Thomas Sowell, who sort of explains it this way, where he says he believes that it's more psychologically gratifying in this way because you can play up what he describes as this moral melodrama. Right. It's a lot more pleasing to the psyche this way because, of course, you can pose and posture as though you are a member of the side that's fighting the good fight, and perhaps that does bring about some kind of, and not to mention that there are a lot of monetary and social gains to be had, but on a personal level, I guess for some people it could seem very fulfilling. But the reality is that certain individuals just they just are where they are in life because they are the victims of circumstances that are not the deliberate acts of some outsider looking to keep them down. If you look at for example, we have a longer history. There's a greater historical a trove of information on what life was like for humanity in the Eastern Hemisphere because of various developments that allowed for the cataloging of the human experience, like the written script and a lot of these different things. And so you had a lot of developmental innovations that occurred in the Eastern Hemisphere that didn't occur in the Americas, the Western Hemisphere. And one of the reasons why, one theory is that the majority of the land mass in the Western Hemisphere runs north to south. And so the Western Hemisphere is stretched this way. The Eastern Hemisphere is stretched this way. And it's easier for individuals to travel along latitudinal lines, meaning, east to west, than to go down longitudinal lines, because when you go down longitudinal lines, Blanche, you're changing climates. Mm-hmm. And so peoples in the Western Hemisphere, and one of the things that hampers development is isolation. A lot of the peoples in the Western Hemisphere were relatively isolated, which means they had very little contact with peoples, spread out along wide distances, wide ranges, because the travel through different climatological environments just made it a little bit too costly and dangerous to travel long distances. This is one of the reasons why people ask, well, how come the Incas didn't foresee what was coming? Because when the Aztecs, I think, if memory serves me correctly, I may be getting the order mixed up, but you all get my point. Because the Aztecs fell at the hands of the Spaniards first, and then the Incas would fall later. And a lot of people speculate, well, why weren't the Incas prepared? Why weren't the Mayans prepared? They didn't know what had happened to the Aztecs, because the Aztecs and the Incas didn't have any contact with one another. And a lot of people wonder why. One of the reasons why is, again, because contrary to popular belief, when you see those old photographs and images of Native Americans riding horses and all this stuff, prior to their encounters with Europeans, Native Americans had never seen a horse. They didn't see horses. Europeans brought horses to the Americas, and as a result, Native Americans would soon learn to ride horses. But the Spanish were amongst some of the world's best horse riders, and they brought horses to the New World. As a result, Blanche, on top of that, that's just one example. But another reason why the Western Hemisphere and why the West was so weak and open for colonization is because of the lack of development, because there was no advanced food subsistence for its time, because they had not yet tamed large beasts of burden. They did not have oxen and these kinds of things to till fields or whatnot. The reason being is because they didn't feel the need to do so. The opportunity didn't present itself. Why? Because those in the Western Hemisphere had little, they had, I don't want to say little to no utilization. According to the historical record, the only thing that they used wheels for was on their toys. So they didn't construct large wheels in the Americas. So therefore, they could not utilize large beasts of burden to till the soil. So they didn't have the wheel in the Western Hemisphere. And so again, is it because, well, a white man came and just oppressed them and this and that, and why certain groups of people lag behind? If you had no utilization and you didn't know what the wheel was for thousands of years, when you come into contact with another, and it seems like I'm off the topic, but I'm not, trust me, because it all feeds back into, again, the private sector and how cultural habits form over time. And oftentimes, if not every time, those cultural habits are the products of the collective decisions made by the individuals who consider themselves to be part of that collective. It's not something external that's coming from the outside. Oftentimes, a people's circumstance has very little to do with oppression and more to do with the fact that they're simply victims of circumstance. And if you want to learn something, if you want to, Blanche, just like to speak to like what happened in the ancient world, like you look at cities, large metropolitan cities developed along large waterways, particularly on the coast, and the peoples in the hinterlands were the folks who were less developed because, Blanche, you didn't have automobiles, you didn't have horse and carriages to take you. People travel by water. So large population centers would gather on the coast, and you would have these mega metropolitan areas that were situated adjacent to vast bodies of water. So you saw development on the coast first, and then development in the hinterlands would come much later. So those peoples living internally, say, for example, in a place like sub-Saharan Africa, people living in the interior of sub-Saharan Africa, Blanche, they're centuries behind some other peoples because they don't have, it was no choice of their own. That's where they were born.
They're cut off from the rest of the world.
They're cut off from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And so when you think about the 20th century, you can't just snap your finger like liberals and just expect everybody to just be equal. And it don't work that way. That's not the way it works.
The notion, and I argue this, I don't know if you agree with me, but I argue this. To me, I just feel like it's not IQ as to why the advancement weren't there, in my opinion. I don't think it's an IQ issue versus it being a where they are living issue. So if you don't have to do certain things, you're not going to do them. Like we talk about the wheel, you talk about certain ways to grow food, certain because you're close to the equator. So I mean, easier to grow. But my point is that again, even if we look at today, Chuck, isolated groups of people in South America, like in those jungles, deep in the Amazon jungles, they live like they did 1,000 years ago. 2000, they haven't changed it. Like they barely changed. As a matter of fact, you may see slight differences when people come visit them and show them stuff, but for the most part, they pretty much operate the same way, because if it ain't broke, why fix it? You know, we've been doing it for 2,000 years, so I don't know. But I don't think it's an IQ issue though.
No, it's not an IQ issue. And so to go back, I know I got off on a tangent, but understand, this is why it's important to bring this up, because this is why those that have that lean or bend toward totalitarianism, this is their weird belief system, this kind of tabula rasa type of thing, where they think that human beings start off as like this blank slate, as if we are not bringing with us the collective experience of those that came before us. And you can't just snap your finger. Exactly. You can't just snap your fingers and expect people to, all of a sudden, I mean, you can't just go into Africa, for example. I'm not trying to pick on Africa, but it's the first thing that came to mind. And all of a sudden, you introduce them to, I don't know, the sport of ice hockey, and expect them to all of a sudden start producing Wayne Gretzky's in somewhere like Nigeria or Angola. It's just not going to happen. If they even
Florida, in Florida,
even in Florida here, exactly. Yeah. There's no ice hockey type culture. A lot of great hockey players come from Minneapolis and Maine and in these places in the North and in the Midwest. Places where there's cold weather, right? You know what I'm saying? And the necessity sort of breeds innovation. How are we going to have sport in a place where the climate is always cold? Well, let's figure out something we can do with this. Let's work with our environment. Let's work with our surroundings. Let's figure something out. And that's what people do, and that's how human capital develops. And so to bring it back to this whole issue of housing, that's just it. Some people are good applicants for loans, and other people are not. And the crazy thing about it is when she said that, like you said, that's the point I wanted to make. When she talked about, all she did was talk about these outcome statistics, because in her mind, and this is why I got on this tangent, because she is assuming that from the get-go, all applicants are equal, and that all groups, blacks, whites, and they act like they're all the same, and that they all made the exact same decisions, and that they all did the exact same things. The first thing you do, Blanche, when you apply for a mortgage, the person is going to ask you questions. And mind you, the person who's actually making the determination, but especially nowadays with everything being so formulaic and with AI and everything else, oftentimes the people making the decisions aren't even the people to whom you are interfacing with. It doesn't work that way anymore. The people making decisions on whether or not a person is eligible for a mortgage are people who don't know you and people who never see you. Oftentimes they don't know if you're black, white, they don't know what you are. It just doesn't work that way. You may have a sales rep or some kind of person in marketing or a loan officer or a banker that you're interfacing with, but that's just it. The banker is simply there to guide you along the process to close, but the banker is getting advice and information from the underwriters, the people who really determine the eligibility of the loan applicant, and then they may communicate that information to the person applying for the mortgage. But race is not a factor. It certainly isn't a factor in today's lending market. But to go back to what I was saying about how she just pretends like everybody's just equal, the first thing a person is going to ask you, they're going to ask you, okay, well, what kind of home do you want to buy? All right, they're going to say, or how much money do you need? Oftentimes you'll hear people say, man, I don't know, man, what do you think I'm eligible for? I don't know, man, what you want to buy? All right, well, maybe I get pre-approved. Can you give me pre-approved for 300,000? And so, okay, 300,000. Okay, where is this home located? And what the lender's going to do is that they're going to take a look at you're going to give the address, the location, and they're going to look at the county, and they're going to look at the recent tax assessments. Right. And they're going to determine, okay, here's what they predict that you'll have to pay in taxes, so on and so forth. They're going to make the determination if this is a home that you can even afford. So to go back to your point, Blanche, and this lady is talking, I don't know, bro. One of these bliggities probably, who knows, they probably showed up trying to buy something that they couldn't afford, or, bro, again, there's so many factors, you just don't know. And the reason why, it's so many factors, but actually we can get into home prices, why home prices are so high relative to where they were. They're kind of the price of homes are growing beyond the rate of inflation because of a lot of
I just put it up. The guy put
because
the
of
numbers
okay. Let me see. Because of a lot of land restrictions, okay, you have, especially like in California, you have a lot of open, what they call what is it called in California? Open space laws. So in California, they restrict development on certain areas of land because you must have open space, etc., whether it be to protect certain wildlife or whatever. You have the environmentalist lobby, right? Oftentimes you'll have very wealthy people who value their space, and so they leverage their influence to get politicians to implement certain regulations and policies that restrict developers from building homes too close to their parcel, right? Because rich people, they do so for privacy, and again, a lot of wealthy rich people, they don't want neighbors. And again, it all depends upon the territory, because like you look at San Francisco and somewhere like New York City, for example, two of the most expensive housing markets in the country. Homes are built very, very close to one another. But you look at a place like San Francisco, right, with the politics of the area, land use is so restrictive, thanks to the environmentalist lobby and all of the ton of other factors, that Blanche, if you were to see some of these San Francisco homes, I mean, they look like they like shacks.
Oh yeah.
They be random, and these be $2 million,
$2
$3 million homes, and they look like trash, right? And you don't see that, and it's in other markets. This is why, to go back to what I said earlier in the conversation, that the housing market, quote unquote, is not national, it's local. So what lenders do, because of the federal government and its push for social justice, right? This is one example of the social justice movement, the housing movement, is that they're going to try and protect themselves against potential losses. This is what socialism is. They want to protect themselves against potential losses by pawning off, by increasing those fees and prices, and transferring that burden onto people like you and me and other folks who are maybe in a position to purchase a home, etc. We get stuck with those higher fees and whatnot because we have to make up for what they predict they'll lose on the back end by extending loans to people who don't deserve them, because they have to give the appearance that they're not being biased. And let me just mention this, Blanche, because I know you probably want to end up soon. But I just want to talk about what the Fair Housing Act did in 1968. This is important because in 1971, as I alluded to, and I talked about Griggs versus Duke Power. For those of you who don't know, Griggs versus Duke Power was a 1971 Supreme Court case where a Black man had sued his company, Duke Power, Griggs, sued Duke Power because he applied for a promotion. Right, he wanted to get promoted internally within the company, and the company was issuing these standard tests to determine one's competency. Right, are you suitable for this position? And the plaintiff in the case, Griggs, made the argument that the test was racially biased. And Blanche, the reason why he believed that, and this, here's the thing, here's the kicker: the courts sided with the plaintiff because the courts came to the conclusion that, and this is literally in the language of the law when you read the majority decision, that even though, and I'm virtually quoting the decision, I can't remember who wrote the decision, but I'm virtually quoting it, that even if on its face the test had no racial motivations whatsoever, if the intention was not to racially discriminate, if it results in disparate impact, then it violates civil rights legislation. It violates the 14th Amendment. Therefore, it is illegal. So if more blacks, Blanche, are likely to fail the test, even though there are no racially biased questions on the test, if more blacks are prone to fail the test, it is illegal. You don't have to prove intent. The only thing that matters is the outcome. So this is where businesses, whether you're talking employment, you're talking about mortgage lending or any other kind of lending, these people, you won't believe the amount of gymnastics in the way the federal government has the private sector over the proverbial barrel. They have to do so much in order so as not to give the appearance that they are discriminating, even if, according to the letter of the law, that certain policy measures were instituted without race or gender, anything like that in mind. They simply expect there to be perfect parity, perfect representation in outcomes, even though black people and white people come from, we're all Americans, but we all know that the subculture that is black culture is its own little dysfunctional fiefdom, and come in with that comes a whole ton of other things. And so at the end of the day, you're not going to see people perfectly represented, but in the eyes of the federal government, that's what they expect to see. And so this is what lenders have to do, and they have to find ways. And what they do is, in order to find ways so as not to get sued by the federal government, Blanche, they're going to pawn that off on whites, Asians, and other folks who and this is what makes purchasing a home more expensive and more burdening, because when the federal government gets involved, now all of a sudden, Blanche, I'll put it to you like to give me, and I know you get it. I'm doing this for the audience. When you got two people, it's me and you, Blanche, and we're trying to come up with a plan, right? We're trying to, it don't matter what it is. We're trying to come up with something that's both suits us. It's easier if you and I are negotiating amongst ourselves, without interference from anyone from the outside.
Yeah.
When you bring a third party in, a fourth party, or let's just make it simple, a third party, now all of a sudden, it's not about what you and I want. It's about what I want. It's about what you want. It's also about what this third party wants. They're not even directly interested in the outcome. But now it matters what they say. So what that does is, Blanche, is that disincentivizes cooperation, because now you've made it more difficult, because now more people have a say-so in the interaction. So you're essentially erecting like interpersonal tariffs in a sense. You're erecting trade barriers which makes it harder for commerce to occur, because more people have a say-so in the interaction. And so in order for the lender to protect itself, they have to, increase the, whatever, because now the federal government is watching them and making sure that, that they don't give the appearance that they might be biased, even though they know all these bliggities showing up ain't got the credit, ain't got the money, ain't got the assets, but they got to find a way to get this. This is how this works, man. This is how this works. And the ripple effect of this is disastrous. It is disastrous.
But Chuck, you know what I find very interesting is that when Black people go to get a car, they understand the process. Like they understand what they qualify for. They understand what they can afford. When they're going to get a vehicle, somehow all of this stuff makes sense. Like they don't say the dealer's racist. They don't say they never say that. When they're going to get a car, they never say these folks are racist. They just get the car they qualify for. I'm trying to figure out, how do you understand that process, but you don't understand when it's time to get a house? It's the same thing. Like you have to qualify for the house. So for example, they'll say, you can get this car right here, but the interest rate is going to be through the roof. So you're going to pay a lot more for this car that you want. If we give it to you, you're going to be upside down in these payments. So get this car, it's more affordable. So again, Black people understand when they purchase a vehicle, but when it comes to a home, now all of a sudden you're talking about redlining, you're talking about covenants, you're talking about HOA, you're talking about Roosevelt, you're talking about everything except the fact that you don't qualify for this house.
That's what it all boils, and that's what Charlie was trying to get the young lady to admit, that there's evidence that there's no racial bias here, because economics are impartial to race. It's just like the laws of physics. If I'm black or white, I know black folks think the melanin somehow turn them into to superheroes, and if they go to the top of a 12-story building and jump off, they're going to sprout wings and fly, or maybe they'll just fly without wings. I know that's what some of these people think. But if I'm black, if I'm white, if I'm Argyle pattern, it doesn't matter. The laws of physics are laws of physics. If I go to the top of a 12-story building and jump off, I'm dead. I'm dead. If I'm black, I'm white, I'm going to die. Economics isn't any different. And black-owned businesses, to Charlie Kirk's point, we're not in the business of trying to do anyone favors because of their race.
Right.
White people aren't in the business of doing people favors. Jewish people, Asians, they're not in the business of doing favors because someone is in their race. Now, again, I do understand that the inherent need to be intra group is to be partial, if you will, towards towards a person in one's own group. I do get that, but again, those things don't last. Those things don't last long when you have a culture that embraces a group cooperation. When you remain within the group, juxtaposed to, or should I say, when you exist within a wider context of individuals who are willing to embrace intergroup cooperation, if you remain cloistered within your own little small limited group and you refuse to venture outward, everyone else is going to pass you by. And it's different when you look at other groups, because people say, well, the whites stick, the Jews stick together, Asians stick together. But that's because Asians and Jews have a totally separate culture, wherein the individuals who comprise that culture are expected to carry their own weight, so to speak. The same cannot be said about black folks. It's a totally different orientation toward the world.
And again, it's almost like black people condemn other groups for doing what they should be doing. And again, like you said, culturally, there's a higher expectation that Jews place on other Jews, Asians place on other Asians. Like these other groups hold other people at a higher accountability than black people do. That's just what it is. So when their child comes home with an F, it's a problem. When your child comes home with an F, they still get the shoes, they still get to have fun, so nothing changes. So you can't blame them for wanting their people to succeed. And again, it's just crazy. I don't know. That's just nuts to me.
They get parent. I mean, they might show up, want to fight the teacher. You come home. I remember I couldn't come home and tell my mama, man, mama, well, she don't like me. My teacher don't like me. My mama wasn't trying to hear that. My mama automatically was going to side with the adult. They want to know, don't hit me with that. The teacher don't like you. What you doing? What you doing?
I grew up in the era where the teacher was always right. That's the era I grew up in. There was no such thing as and racism. Boy, that wasn't even heard of. The teacher's racist? Nah.
Right. Nah. And too, Black, I would be remiss if I didn't mention before we get out of here that there was a string of government policies or government or laws, federal statutes that were passed. Like in 1977, you had the Community Reinvestment Act. And this piece of legislation, like I said, I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. This legislation forced banks to invest in the community, and in fact, this is where a lot of Democrat Party power comes from, particularly in our inner cities, as far as like a lot of these various activist groups and these nonprofits, etc. Because banks would be punished by the federal government if a certain percentage of their portfolios were not set aside for community reinvestment. In other words, that if a bank was located in a particular area, the belief was that it was illegitimate if it didn't adequately serve the community. And so a lot of times You had groups led by Jesse Jackson and his Push organization, these other organizations. They would literally, without mincing words, for lack of better words, they would extort large banks like Wells Fargo transferred millions of dollars to Jesse Jackson because he threatened to contact the federal government, or he threatened to use his influence or what have you to force the federal government to file a lawsuit against Wells Fargo if they and other banks such as Wells, if they refuse to lend him money for his various activism endeavors. And this is where a lot of this stuff comes from, because these banks are put over a barrel because they're forced to invest in these organizations. Not just home loans but other lending ventures as well. So
It's a bad investment, though, Chuck.
Yeah, I know. And the banks, like I said, banks don't want to do it. Look at this called the Community Reinvestment Act. And this is how a lot of these black activists were getting over, and they were funneling millions of dollars into these quote unquote nonprofit organizations.
Getting money hand over fist.
Getting money hand over fist because the federal government would crack down on them. Acorn, we all know about happened with Acorn. Acorn did the same thing. It's insane what the federal government is doing, because at the end of the day, I mean that's what it all boils down to. These people did not have faith, and I'm talking, we can go from Jacob Riis, fast forward all the way through the 20th century, and all these various activists and politicians were going on and on about this housing bull crap. They simply did not trust the private sector, or in other words, they did not trust individuals to do the job. They wanted the federal government to come up with a solution.
Hold on, Shay. I just want to hear what this girl finishes with, and then we can close it up.
Why do you think that was, Charlie?
Well, so let me ask you a question. First of all, of course, it's partially racism, partially structural, in the sense not that it's inequality.
So we have structural racism.
No.
So I don't understand what the argument is.
No, it's not. It's also because that blacks did not have their own capital accounts.
No.
It's also because of this.
No, it's not.
Let me ask you a question.
That's why we're talking about the GI Bill,
Let me ask you,
Charlie.
why is it that black incomes increased while redlining was also prevalent? Black incomes increased faster than white incomes.
What does income have to do with
everything?
No, Charlie.
If redlining was so terrible, why were blacks getting richer than whites in the 40s?
I don't think you're understanding.
No, answer the question. Why were blacks getting richer than the whites?
You don't understand. You don't understand. It seems like what redlining is.
No, I do.
No, Charlie, your ability to buy a house is not the same thing as your ability to earn a higher income.
So your grandparents were harmed by redlining, is that right?
My
Hold up. If you
lady, listen, it goes back to what I started out saying, Blanche. Homes have to be paid for. Not only do homes have to be paid for, but again, in order to capitalize on any future equity, and there is no guarantee that in the future there will be increased equity in your home, because guess what, ladies and gentlemen, property values can decrease. Sometimes, there are unforeseen circumstances that may cause a decline in the market. The area in which the area in which the home is located. But again, Blanche, in order for you to capitalize on that equity, the home must be maintained. Owning a home is a massive expense. You may end up in a position where that equity is virtually useless because you've ruined the collateral because you did not maintain it. Because there is no guaranteed return on any investment, and real estate investing is another core example of that. Even if you purchase a home for what's called primary residence and not investment, you have a primary residence you can purchase, you have an investment property you can purchase, and you have a second home you can purchase. So I'm assuming that she's talking about just owning a home just so you can occupy for, so that you can live in it. But again, income is extremely important because lenders take that into consideration. Because if you don't have the money,
you can't afford the house. You can't
afford it. You can't live there because you have to pay the principal along with the interest. So income is extremely important. It's one of the things that lenders look at. They look when they're going to ask you, right, do you have any? Because oftentimes people will work a job. you know, and I'm trying to,
Yeah,
I don't
they'll
know.
they'll get an extra job. Yeah, they'll get an extra job. Yeah, they
So
will.
so
Yeah.
either because it is becoming ever more tough to put forth a down payment for a home using monies that you save. It is becoming hard because home prices are increasing. And again, that has a lot to do, everything to do with government meddling and interfering with the profit earning prospects of would-be developers who simply don't see the juice as being worth the squeeze, so to speak, right? So there's that. But you have people who work jobs that offer 401k benefits, and if you have a 401k or something like it, you have the option of making a one-time withdrawal for the purpose of putting a down payment, putting monies down for a down payment on a home. That is an option that you have, as because when we're talking about 401k, you can only withdraw from your 401k for very specific reasons, or sometimes you can take out a loan against yourself. You can pay that loan back, using your 401k. But that's another way that a lot of people get the monies for a down payment for a home. They use the money that is in their 401k. So if you get a job, so, let your 401k stack a little bit, right? And again, decisions that are apart from the home buying process, because for a first-time home buyer, it probably wouldn't behoove you to purchase a 3,000 square foot, 4-bedroom home when you're a single man or woman. If you want to have a stake, if you want to try to build your nest egg, why don't you purchase a 1 or 2-bedroom condo? Something like that, something a little bit modest that you can afford. And then when it's time for you to marry and to start building a family, that's when you start looking into potentially buying a single family residence with 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, etc. But again, it's about what can you actually afford. And like you said, Blanche, it's amazing to me that she just acts like income is just completely
That is
it's
crazy.
completely irrelevant. That has nothing to do with it. You don't know what redlining. You don't know what redlining is. Oh man, crazy, dude, crazy.
All right, Chuck. I may have to have you back on to do a. I want you to talk about really get into the disparate impact, and I had so many videos where people was just, dude, you wouldn't believe what people are saying, and it's just like I really want to get. I really want to get your reaction to these. But I'm glad you did this the first time, and the second time I can just have you respond to videos, because these people are, when I tell you they talking, my goodness, it's crazy.
Yeah, I'll promise, man, to shut it up next time and let you get to more of your videos. But it's a lot to unpack. It's a lot to explain, because it's a very complicated process. Again, you have the land. There's land. There's the development end. There's the tax end. Because even when you own a home, you still have to pay taxes on the land. And I mean, there are so many different factors. You have purchase transactions, you have refinance transactions, you have different, people buy homes for different purposes. As I mentioned, you have people who buy homes for residency or for primary residence. You have people who buy homes for investment. You have people who buy second homes. They have a primary residence, but they also have a second home. Each one of those particular purchase transactions comes with a totally separate set of lending guidelines. So there are a lot there. Of course, there's the appraisal aspect of it. How do appraisers make their determinations? Sometimes, depending on the vitality within any given market, sometimes a lender will accept because if you say, for example, if you want to refinance a home, a lender will simply ask you, what do you think your home is worth? How much money do you want? Depending on the amount of market activity, sometimes certain lenders qualify for what's referred to as a property inspection waiver, where they don't even need to have an appraisal done. but you have to qualify for such a concession. So there are a lot of factors, and I know that there are some people out there who have never been through the process, don't know about home buying and mortgage lending, which again is something totally separate. You have real estate agents, you got they're their
A lot
own.
of
So
moving parts, man.
it's a
It's a
lot
lot.
of moving parts. You got real estate agents got their own thing. Again, sellers and buyers and this and that, and
The
you
market
got
value, I'm talking about it's so like
it's
it's a
so
lot.
many moving parts. That's why I spent so much time explaining, probably talking too much, but that's why I felt the need to explain all that. But at the end of the day, Blanche, that's what redlining is. When the federal government, lastly, just my last point for those of you who just got lost in the sauce and are like, what the heck is redlining? Redlining is when the federal government began providing mortgage lenders with what's called mortgage insurance. All mortgage insurance is because lenders were like, nah, we're not gonna lend to you because we don't think you're going to pay us back. The federal government stepped in and said, okay, this is what we'll do. We'll take from the taxpayers. And like I said, and now people actually pay mortgage insurance directly to their lender, right? But the federal government said that we will secure the loan on the back end. Essentially, is what the federal government did to prompt lenders to extend credit to people that they otherwise would not have without the insurance provided to them by the taxpayers, by the federal government. And the federal government said to themselves that we have to look at where large concentrations of people live who have what they called low credit grades, and we're going to mark that. And this is where the term redlining came from, because they marked those areas with the red X, with the red, marked it off in red. This is the story. This is how the term redlining came about. Because these were areas where people had low credit ratings. They were all bunched together, and the federal government said that we won't insure those loans. Not that lenders couldn't lend to those people, but you just couldn't get taxpayer-funded mortgage insurance to help secure the loss if someone happened to default. That's all that meant.
But it has nothing to do with race, though.
Nothing to do with race, because white people were redlined, particularly Jews were redlined. I know people talk about Jews, people get triggered, but I'm just telling you what it was. I'm not going to get into any of that. But Jews were redlined, Italians were redlined, Irish people were redlined as a matter of sheer amount. A larger percentage of non-blacks were redlined than blacks were. And during that same period, from the 30s until the 1960s, home ownership for every ethnic group in the United States went up because wealth increased for everyone simultaneously. Because in order to purchase a home, you need to have wealth first and foremost in order to make the transaction. Purchasing a home does not guarantee you wealth. You must have wealth in order to purchase a home. And that's why income is very important, because when you make money, if you save said money, right, and you balance that with what you spend versus what you earn, you can create a savings that you can then present to the lender and say that here's the amount of money that I'm bringing at close for down payment. Now tell me what kind of home can I afford? I got 20 grand I can put down on a home. What can I afford? But if you ain't making no money, where are you going to get the down payment from?
And to piggyback on your point, Chuck, the redlining argument is primarily in major cities. In these major cities, black people were not the majority.
No, they weren't.
It was all the other groups. So it makes sense that the other groups were the ones that are quote unquote redline, because those were the majority. Black people were mostly in the South. They were
still in the South.
They were still in the South. So the impact of redlining, is funny to me, is that the folks that should be complaining about it aren't. The folks that should be crying about redlining aren't saying nothing about it. It's the folks that are probably the least impacted by redlining, which are black people, who are complaining about it. Not saying that black people were not impacted, but I'm saying the reasons why were not because of race.
It's just an excuse, man. And like I said, a lot of black folks, they either sold those homes. A lot of those homes were destroyed. These communities were destroyed as a result of the various outbreak. And, you know, talk about the riots of the 1960s and the whole civil rights movement. That's what destroyed these areas, destroyed these communities, made these areas places where people didn't want to live. Because that is another fascinating aspect of the housing market. Because the value of the home is determined by how much money someone is willing to pay for it. It's unique. It's not like, you know, going to the grocer and buying a carton of eggs or a loaf of bread. It's a little bit. It's different. It's a little bit more complicated. A little bit more complicated than that. But again, these predominantly black areas became places where people didn't want to live. Because the people, and then again, this is another thing, again, that hurts equity, right? Because the equity that you have in a home is based upon the value of your home, and the value of your home,
yes,
exactly, the value of your home is going to be determined by what a potential seller would pay for it on the market. If you live in inner city Detroit, you can't, you know, you live in the hood somewhere or wherever, you know what I'm saying? That
you're not
you
calling
can't
no
just,
shot. You're not.
you ain't calling those shots, bro. You can't just throw your home on the market and say, well, I want 500 grand. Nah, they ain't buying that. You know, so when you have people, it bring crime, despair, you know, cultural, it just, all of a sudden it destroys your property value because the people, nobody wants to be around the people. Therefore, nobody's going to buy a home in that area. Next thing you know, your home equity disappears within a flash because your home has no value because nobody wants to buy it.
Well, thanks, Chuck. I'm probably going to have you back on to actually talk about redlining as it pertains to property values decreasing, increasing. It's such a nuanced conversation to just say it's just racism and just redlining. It's just kind of, it's just a lie because it's just too many moving parts and people still want to make money. Like it doesn't make any, like if you can afford a home and you
Somebody gonna sell it to you.
Somebody gonna sell that. Like think about it. Think about a white person. I'm talking about racist. They're selling their home, let's say for $200,000. This black family comes and says, well, we'll buy it for $210. You think they ain't gonna sell it?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And,
like you think,
yeah. And the thing, and that's what happens when, you can, and some people do this strategically. Sometimes they'll put their home on the market for less than market value because sometimes they want to spur a bidding war because they think that will drive the value of the home above the market median. And so, like you said, if I'm a white person and I'm selling my home for 200 grand, and all of a sudden I have multiple multiple potential buyers, and they're bidding for my property, they're presenting me with purchase agreements, and I'm coming back with counter offers, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden I zero in on a black buyer who is, pre-approved and is willing to purchase the home for, let's say if I put on the market for 200 and they're willing to pay 220.
Yeah.
And the closest other a potential buyer happens to be a white person or a white family, and they're like, well, we'll give you 210, 215. So I'm gonna go with the black family. Thank you. And that's exactly what happened in the case that ended up in the Supreme Court, Shelley versus Kramer. So I don't care about that declaration. I'm gonna sell to this black family because they got the money, and I'm gonna sell it. And I'm gonna get on the body here and gonna make my money, and I'm gonna dip out.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you, Chuck, man. Because I've been hearing about redlining for so long, I'm just like, yeah, I couldn't take it no more, man. I'm like, I can't take it. When I saw what sent me over the edge was Amanda Seals, and she sent me over the edge. She did. I'm not gonna lie, she did. And the dude was like, you don't believe in redlining? He was like, no, I don't. You don't believe it? He was like, no, I don't. Where you from? Where your family? I said, I can't take it. I can't take it. She didn't counter anything this man said. She just I can't take it. I said, no.
But listen, I'll watch it. I watched you talk about it, man. It was tough to get through. She's something else, man. And then talking about something, yeah, she lost the debate because she wasn't debating. You knew what the assignment was when you got there. What you mean? Just because you made a fool out of yourself and all of a sudden, because there's not up for debate. I'm not going to debate if these questions aren't up for debate. Then why the hell you show up? You knew what this was. So why you lying? You lying because you got embarrassed. Because even the people who think like you was probably like, yeah, dog, she ain't do us no favors, man. Because she got up there and made a fool of herself because if
She
somebody
did.
was on because somebody on the fence about reparations or whatever, heck, you sure as hell ain't win them over with that debate performance because you are terrible,
Horrible.
lady.
Horrible. But it's just the way she was saying redlining, and then Jubilee put the redlining fact check up there, and I was like, and it's just
No,
the way they did it because I don't know. I couldn't take
nah,
it.
man. Black folks lag behind in terms of home ownership. And then it's all relatively speaking because as a whole, as I said repeatedly, home ownership increased during that same period of redlining. But relatively speaking, they didn't catch up. And I don't know why people have this illusion again that there's supposed to be perfect racial parity and balance in all things when
It's
people make different
insanity.
decisions. It's just so insane. But the reason why you can say black home ownership lagged behind is for a myriad of other reasons. You talk about earnings and income and choices, decisions, behavior, educational attainment, marriage rates. There are all kinds of factors that inhibited them in some way or another. It's not redlining has nothing at all to do. And again, Blanche, and you had to, as a human being with agency, you drew red lines around an area where black people live. So the story goes, you live there, you live somewhere. Again, what say you when it comes to the value of the area that you live in? How come black folks didn't convert their area? And I'm not just talking about infrastructure, because that's the progressive mantra, that's the progressive mind state. Buildings and streets and whatever inanimate objects in and of themselves, these things don't act, these things aren't sentient. These are just things. It's the people. So why didn't black folk make the areas wherein they lived more attractive places so that they could have raised the value of the homes that they already lived in? You could say, well, they didn't own, they just rented, or whatever the case may be.
You could
But there are a
attract
lot of things
investors, though.
you
You
could
could
have
attract
impacted investment.
Yeah.
A lot of things could have changed. So you still have to live somewhere. So what does that say in terms of the property value of the homes that you had? You had to live somewhere. So what the hell were you doing? Were you just outside? The whole thing makes no sense. You weren't outside. You lived somewhere.
Right.
So why couldn't you raise the property value of the home that you lived in by taking care of what you already had? But y'all won't let me move where I want to move. I'm applying for a loan and y'all told me no. Well, who the hell says that you get whatever it is that you ask for? No. Yeah, your credit scoring high enough, you ain't got no. But I don't want to live. No, you don't get it. Oh, but I don't know. I don't want to get you black. No. Okay, well, I'll just continue to live here. And you make the best out of the situation that you are in. And if every other black person is agreeing to do the same thing, you could have turned your all black community into a veritable paradise. But you didn't do that, did you?
But that's what I wanted to, because some of the people were saying that the government forced the black people to move in the slums, and that's how they was purposely put in the ghettos against their will. I was like, what the? I tell you, this stuff is insane, dude. I'm like, what are y'all talking about?
But it's the people, Blanche. The people are the ones that make it a ghetto. The place is not. There's no reason why a project building has to be filthy, dirty, nasty,
Right.
crime riddled.
Right.
There is no logical rationale or explanation why it has to be that way. None whatsoever. None whatsoever. It's the mentality of the residents. It's the mentality of the citizenry. It's their behavior. They destroy things. They wreck things. They make areas uninhabitable. They make them places where good people don't want to be. And again, and they shame you for refusing to interact with them, and they refuse. They mock the people who come from these areas that move on or whatever, and then those individuals, they have some kind of survival guilt or complex about themselves, and they, so whatever. I mean, there are a ton of other problems, but yeah, bro, there's no reason why the ghetto should look that way. It doesn't have to look that way.
You know what's funny, Chuck? I'm gonna let you go. You know what's funny? Remember on Friday, the one person that cared about his yard, they hated.
Yeah, Stanley.
Stanley was the actual only one that cared about his property. They would purposefully walk on his grass. Like they hated Stanley because he had a standard. That was just crazy.
No respect for private property. I mean, the whole Western Project hinges on that. Is respect for private property. Like the late great economist Walter Williams used to say. He likened everything to private property, figuratively speaking, even one's life. Look at it as something that you own, and the reason why, he like I say, he explained it in economic terms, or kind of like the ethics of economics, if you will, when he talked about murder. Is he said that murder is an example of property, and you don't have the right to take you do not have the right to take what does not belong to you. It goes back to the whole broken windows theory of policing. It starts off very small. If someone breaks a window and no one fixes it, if someone graffitis the side of a building and no one fixes it, it begins to breed the apathy amongst the residents because they feel as though no one cares. If somebody will disrespect your property by walking on your grass, cut the corner and won't use the sidewalk, that same person will break into your house. Yep. And if they're breaking into your house, they'll kill you.
Yep.
Right? Because they don't respect your property. They don't respect your things. It's very intimate, a very serious thing, But again, we get the importance of property. We get these conceptions from, the great Western Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, Adam Smith, and Thomas Jefferson, and these are all right, evil, racist white men who whatever the script, what it is. So
it's crazy. All right, Chuck. We're gonna end it here. I'm about to make this thumbnail. Hopefully I can make one funny with this red light.
And man, let me see. I don't think my wife can hear me. Hold on 1 second, Black.
Oh, I forgot these super stickers, y'all.
Did you I was telling Blanche about last night. Did you hear that last night? What? Did you hear my computer cut on? And did you hear Blanche? You heard it? Okay. Yeah. I'll tell you, man. Hey, Blanche Kruger, bro. Don't play with me tonight, man. I gotta get a good night rest, bro.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna leave you alone. I'll leave you alone tonight. Yeah. All right, Chuck. Thanks for coming on, man. And I'm gonna hit you up for this part 2 because the forced placement in the ghetto was the thing that we didn't get to, but yeah. Right. But thank you, Chuck. Right. Cool. Thank you, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
All right, for sure, bro.
All right. All right, y'all. I got to go to bed. Chuck is an awesome historian. If y'all not following Chuck, please follow Teach Him Chuck. Y'all on IG listening, y'all on Twitter listening, on Rumble listening. Follow Teach Him Chuck for everything about history that you want to know. I can promise you that what you think you know is, if you do know something, it's probably wrong. And if you do know something, you probably don't know anything. So I think you should hit up Chuck. Not hit up Chuck, but follow Chuck. He's on YouTube. Follow him on YouTube. Definitely. He's on Instagram. I don't know if he's on Twitter, but Teach Him Chuck is his handle. Let me just run through these stickers real quick. Willie Doc, Batman from Detroit, Aquaman from Atlanta, Georgia, collaborating on this great topic. Thanks to you both. Thank you so much. You know what? I might do that as the thumbnail. Batman and Aquaman. I might do that. Okay. Thank you, Willie Doc. Anthony, thank you so much for the super sticker. Thank you so much. Cruise Missile, always important. Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it. Jerome B, Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Rick Hampstead, thank you so much. Great show as always. Great chat family. God bless. Thank you so much. The Scrapping Beauty, Truth Bombs. This is my work pool. You can make a lot of money if you build your capital first. Amen. Idris Singleton, just a little support. I didn't know you guys were on live. Thank you, Idris, so much. Alethea, thank you so much. Always supporting Alethea. Thank you. Thanks for the excellent podcast. We'll listen from the start. May have talked earlier, but I have seen Asian people live together, work and save money and do loans to themselves to buy homes and businesses. Yes, Asians do it. Indians do it. Most immigrants do it. They'll sacrifice for the greater good. You just got black folks trying to buy houses single. Like it's crazy. Chance Dawson, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Listen, y'all, I love y'all, and we'll see y'all again. I'm gonna bring Chuck on to talk about it again because there's so much more to talk about when it comes to this notion of just this whole redlining thing, because the redlining spills into the putting you in the ghettos and then environmentally redlining you. Listen, it's crazy. It's crazy. Listen, I love y'all, and I will see y'all soon. Thank you.